A steel beam snapped loose above a crowded downtown construction site and came crashing down onto a waiting luxury sedan. In a single deafening instant, the car twisted into mangled wreckage glass, exploding outward, smoke and sparks filling the air. Inside was Victoria Hale, Billionaire CEO of Hale Global Developments, trapped by steel, her life seconds from ending. Just when it seemed too late, a pair of rough, calloused hands forced the door open, dragging her free with astonishing strength and gentleness. She gasped for air, clutching life itself. Yet when she looked up, her rescuer was gone. Only his weathered jacket remained across her shoulders. Follow this story to the very end and comment the city you are watching from, so we can see how far this story travels. The horn screamed on, stuck in its death cry. Glass crunched beneath boots as people rushed forward, shouting, panicked. But none of them had been the one who acted first. None had moved as the beam fell. It was him. Through the haze, Victoria caught fragments of him. Navy work shirt, jeans torn at the knee, hair falling across his brow, hands like stone yet tender in the way they steadied her head, shielded her body from falling shards. "Stay with me," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was steady, like an anchor in a storm. Her lungs filled with smoke. Her ears rang. She tried to form words, "Thank you, who are you?" but her lips barely moved. By the time the paramedics arrived, he had melted into the gathering crowd. They found her sitting on the curb, jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, as if it were armor. Her breathing ragged, her eyes scanning faces that blurred together. But not his, not the one she wanted to see. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" a paramedic asked, kneeling, his gloved hand gently lifting her chin. She could only shake her head. Bruises bloomed along her ribs, blood still trickled from her temple, but pain wasn't what made her tremble. It was the question burning in her mind. Why would someone save her life, and then disappear? That question clung to her long after the wreckage was cleared, long after reporters descended, cameras flashing, long after the glass-strewn street was swept clean. It haunted her. At 5:30 the next morning, across town, an old alarm clock rattled on a scratched nightstand. Blake Carter silenced it quickly, careful not to wake the child sleeping in the next room. He sat for a moment in the stillness, running a hand through his hair. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but habit pulled him upright. The kitchen was dim. The fridge held only a few items: milk, eggs, half a jar of peanut butter. He packed a lunchbox with practiced precision sandwich cut in triangles, apple slices wrapped in wax paper, a small note scribbled on lined paper. "Shine bright today, sunshine." Then he padded into the small bedroom where his 6-year-old daughter lay dreaming. Emma. His world. His reason for everything. Her room was filled with cardboard rockets, colored drawings taped unevenly to the walls, pipe cleaner flowers and chipped mugs. Creation born of love and paper scraps. Blake touched her shoulder. "Time to rise and shine." "Sunshine," he whispered the same words every morning. Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "5 more minutes, Daddy." "You know what happens if you're late? Cereal gets angry." Her giggle broke the silence, small and sweet. Soon she sat at the tiny kitchen table, arranging cereal into patterns before eating it row by row. Her quirk, her little fortress of control after a mother who had walked away years ago. Blake sipped his coffee, studying her face. Her bangs fell across her forehead like her mother's once had. Catherine. The name still a wound. Catherine had left when Emma was 3, saying she wasn't cut out for motherhood. She hadn't looked back. The weight had fallen squarely on Blake. Work, rent, scraped knees, ear infections, midnight fevers. Bedtime stories read with tired eyes but a steady voice. At 35, his hands were calloused, his back stiff, his once bright dream of finishing architecture school folded away like forgotten blueprints. But when Emma wrapped her small arms around his neck and whispered, "You're the best, Daddy," none of the rest mattered. By 7, Blake knocked on the apartment door downstairs. Gloria Jenkins, 72, sharp-eyed behind thick glasses, opened with a smile. "You look tired, Blake." "I've looked worse," he said, forcing a grin. Gloria, widow of a construction worker, had become their lifeline. She cared for Emma when shifts ran late. Her gaze lingered on him, knowing more than he admitted. Working extra again, trying to save up. Emma's ear infections back, He didn't mention the crash, didn't mention the beam, didn't mention the CEO he had pulled from the wreckage. But Gloria's eyes narrowed knowingly. I saw on the news, some big shot saved down at your site. Blake shrugged. I was on the west side. Didn't see much. Her silence pressed, but she didn't push. She only squeezed his arm. Your father would be proud, whatever you did or didn't do. The words followed him into the morning air. Robert Carter. His father had been a carpenter. In 1985, he'd pulled strangers from a burning building and never told a soul. Carters don't help for applause, he'd said. We help because it's right. Blake repeated the words now as he walked to the Grand Tower site, the echo of groaning steel still sharp in his ears. Across town, high above the city, Victoria Hale sat in her glass-walled office. Bruises hid beneath a tailored suit. The skyline glittered beyond the window towers with her name etched into steel. Yet she felt fragile, smaller than the woman who once commanded boardrooms. Her fingers brushed the weathered jacket folded neatly on her desk. His jacket, the only trace of him. She pressed it to her chest and whispered, "Why did you leave?" No one answered. Only silence. Only the hum of the city below. Only the knowledge that for the first time in her life, she had been saved by someone who asked for nothing in return, and it unsettled her more than anything ever had. The days that followed the crash blurred together for Victoria Hale. Board meetings, news coverage, flowers from executives who wanted to be seen as sympathetic, lawyers who insisted she should consider legal action against the contractor, reporters who begged for interviews about the miracle's survival. She brushed them all aside. What kept her awake at night wasn't the twisted wreck of her car or even the dull ache of her ribs. It was the man who had pulled her free. The memory replayed again and again. His grip on her arms. The rasp in his voice when he told her to stay with him. The weight of his jacket, still faintly scented of dust and sweat, wrapped around her as she sat on the curb. And then his absence. He had vanished as though saving her had been no more remarkable than opening a door. Victoria, who had lived her life negotiating billion-dollar contracts and commanding boardrooms with a single glance, found herself rattled by one simple question. Who was he? At the construction site across the river, life had returned to normal, or at least the kind of normal Blake Carter knew. The Grand Tower rose floor by floor, a skeletal giant of steel and concrete. Blake worked silently, head down, tightening bolts, measuring supports, hauling loads until his muscles burned. During breaks, the men clustered in groups, swapping jokes, grumbling about overtime, speculating about the crash that had made the evening news. You hear the boss lady was in that car, one worker muttered, unwrapping his sandwich. Some CEO Hale, I think. Word is she almost got crushed. Another laughed. Bet she's got a dozen lawyers suing somebody already. Yeah, but they say some worker pulled her out. The first man leaned forward, voice dropping, and she's offering 20 grand to find him. Heads turned, conversation shifted, jokes paused. 20,000. Just to know his name. That's the rumor. Imagine what that'd do. Pay off my truck. Get me out of this dump. Blake chewed his sandwich quietly, eyes fixed on the half-built tower outside the break room window. He didn't look up when someone nudged him. You were on that side yesterday, weren't you? Carter? See anything? West side, Blake said flatly. The same answer he'd given Gloria. Didn't see much. The younger men shrugged, conversation moving on, but Blake felt the weight of his father's words again. Carters don't help for applause. We help because it's right. Still, $20,000. That kind of money could pay for Emma's ear surgery, could erase months of bills, could start a savings account, maybe even a college fund. For a moment, temptation flickered, but it passed, because accepting a reward meant stepping into the light, and stepping into the light meant paperwork, licenses, military discharge records that weren't as clean as they should be. It meant risk, and Blake couldn't risk anything, not when Emma depended on him. That night, the apartment was filled with the warm chaos of bedtime. Emma spread crayons across the floor, working on a rocket drawing. This one's going to the moon, Daddy, and it has a garden on top so astronauts can eat carrots in space. Blake smiled, crouching beside her. Carrots, huh? No chocolate cake? Emma gasped in mock horror. Daddy, you can't grow chocolate cake in dirt. Shows what you know, Blake teased, and she laughed, the sound filling the small apartment with light. Later, after story time, after her breathing had deepened into sleep, Blake lingered by her door, watching her, protecting her. His father had once stood in a doorway just like this. He remembered the silhouette, the smell of sawdust, the tired but steady voice that said, "We don't choose the easy road, son. We choose the right one." Blake whispered it now to himself, to the sleeping child who would never know her grandfather. We choose the right one. Across town, Victoria stood on her balcony 30 stories up Pittsburgh, glittering below. The city was her empire, glass and steel monuments to her name. But tonight the skyline felt hollow. She sipped wine, staring at the jacket draped over the chair behind her. She could still feel its weight on her shoulders, smell the trace of concrete dust in the fabric. Robert, her assistant, had spent hours combing security footage. HR had pulled every worker file they could find. She had authorized cash rewards, safety inspections, surprise site visits. No one matched. No one stepped forward. Caroline Weber, her closest friend and legal counsel, had finally said what Victoria least wanted to hear. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. Victoria had snapped back, absurd, ridiculous. Of course he would want recognition opportunity. Of course he would want what she could give him. Caroline's reply still lingered sharp as glass. Not everyone measures life by the same metrics you do, Vic. Victoria turned back to the city. Her father's voice rose from memory, gravelly and warm. Never forget where you came from, Vicky. Success without integrity is just greed in a prettier suit. She touched the place on her wrist where the emerald bracelet, his graduation gift, used to rest. Lost in the crash. Another piece of him gone. She clenched her fist. She would find the man who saved her. Not because she needed closure, not because of gratitude, but because she couldn't stop thinking about him. Saturday morning. Riverside Park buzzed with children chasing each other across the playground. Parents chatted on benches. Sunlight glittered off the fountain. Blake sat on a weathered bench sipping coffee, his eyes following Emma as she swung from monkey bars, fearless and laughing. This was their ritual, their sanctuary. No work, no bill. Just Emma. Daddy, watch this, she shouted, dangling upside down. I see you, monkey, he called back, smiling. Be careful. He didn't notice the woman until she spoke. She's fearless. Blake turned. His heart skipped. Victoria Hale. Gone were the suits and stilettos. Today she wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. Ms. Hale, he said stiffly, standing half a step straighter. What are you doing here? I live nearby, she said lightly. Sometimes I walk here on weekends. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, searching his face. Emma, oblivious, ran up. Daddy, there's an ice cream truck. Can I please, Blake? Chuckled. Before lunch, Emma clasped her hands dramatically. Please. All right, just a small one. He handed her a few dollars. Only then did Emma notice Victoria. Hi, are you Daddy's friend? Victoria hesitated. I'm Victoria. I'm Emma, I'm 6. Emma beamed. Do you build buildings too, like Daddy? Victoria's smile softened. Something like that. Emma gasped. Daddy can fix anything except Mommy. But he says some things stay broken, and that's okay. The words hit like a stone in Blake's chest. Silence hung heavy. Sunshine. Blake said gently, Why don't you get your ice cream by the fountain? Emma skipped off, leaving him and Victoria in the quiet. Blake exhaled slowly. What do you want from me? Ms. Hale. Victoria met his gaze steady. I wanted to thank you. Blake's jaw tightened. Her words confirmed what he already suspected. She knew, and whatever came next would change everything. The strawberry popsicle dripped down Emma's wrist as she skipped back, grinning ear to ear. She carried a vanilla cone too, balancing it carefully, pride glowing in her face. I got one for you, Daddy, she announced, and a vanilla for your friend. Everyone likes vanilla, right? Victoria blinked, startled, before accepting the melting cone. That's very thoughtful, Emma. Thank you. Emma plopped down on the bench between them, swinging her legs as she licked her ice cream. She began chattering about school, about her friend Zoe, about how she was building a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes that was going to Mars. Blake listened, smiling faintly. Victoria listened too, though unlike boardroom chatter, she didn't interrupt, didn't redirect. She found herself drawn in, laughing softly, when Emma proclaimed that her rocket would have a trampoline on the roof in case astronauts got bored. For 2 full hours, Victoria sat with them, ice cream sunshine, and a child's boundless imagination softening edges she didn't know she carried. When Emma darted off toward the swings again, Blake leaned back against the bench, arms crossed. "So, now you've seen me." Satisfied, Victoria's eyes lingered on Emma. Not even close. That night, the unease that had stalked Blake for weeks grew sharper. He washed dishes in the dim kitchen, Emma humming in her bedroom as she brushed her teeth. His mind circled the same questions. Why had Victoria tracked him down? Why sit on a park bench with them for hours instead of sending lawyers or PR staff? What did she want? A knock at the door snapped him from thought. He frowned. Gloria never visited this late. When he opened the door, his heart stumbled. Victoria. No designer suit, just a simple dress that somehow still looked more expensive than everything in his apartment combined. "Ms. Hale," he said, wary. "This is unexpected. I'm sorry to intrude." She glanced at the hallway, then back at him. "May I come in?" Blake hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking in the cramped living room, the sagging sofa, the bookshelf lined with architecture volumes worn from use, Emma's drawings taped proudly to every wall. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. Victoria Emma gasped from the doorway, hair damp from her bath. "You came... want to see my rocket ship?" Victoria's lips curved. "I'd love to." Emma darted off and returned with a creation of cardboard and glitter, her face glowing with pride. "This is mission control, and this is where astronauts sleep. Daddy helped me cut it, but I did the design." Victoria crouched, studying the details. "It's extraordinary. You thought of everything." Emma beamed. "I'm going to be an architect like Daddy." Blake's throat tightened. He ruffled her hair gently. "Time for bed, sunshine. Say goodnight." "Good night, Victoria." Emma hugged her impulsively before skipping off. The apartment grew quiet again. Victoria stood smoothing her dress. "You were in architecture school." Blake's jaw tensed. "Cornell. A long time ago." "What happened?" He met her gaze unflinching. "Life happened, Ms. Hale." She didn't leave it there. "I came to thank you, and to offer something real in return. A place where your skills could matter." Blake's laugh was sharp, humorless. "So now the rich CEO rescues the poor construction worker. Is that how this goes?" Her face stiffened. "That's not... isn't it?" He cut in. His voice was low-controlled, but his words landed like blows. "You investigate me. You come to my home unannounced. You offer to elevate me out of my humble existence. Did it ever cross your mind that I might be content with my life?" The silence between them ached. Victoria's cheeks flushed. She tried again. "That wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" For once, Victoria Hale, the woman who commanded skyscrapers, who silenced boardrooms with a single glance, found herself speechless. She dropped her eyes, breath shaky. "I should go." Blake's anger softened. "Wait." She paused at the door. He exhaled. "I'm sorry. You came to say thank you, and I've been defensive. But tell me, why did you help me that day?" The question startled her. "Because you were in danger." "No," he pressed. "Why?" Her lips parted. She didn't have an answer ready. "Because that's what people should do for each other," Blake said quietly. "Because my daughter watches everything I do, and I want her to know what kind of world we live in." Victoria's throat tightened. For the first time in years, her certainty faltered. I'll see you Saturday," she whispered, then slipped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut. Blake stood there in the silence, Emma's rocket ship glittering in the lamplight. For the first time since the crash, he wondered if saving Victoria Hale might end up costing him far more than he had imagined. The elevator doors slid shut and sealed Victoria Hale inside a bright brass box, her reflection fractured into slim panels of silver and gold. She pressed the lobby button, then caught herself in the mirror. Cheeks flushed, eyes bright, the fragile aftershock of emotion still clinging to her. The hallway outside Blake Carter's apartment smelled faintly of laundry soap and old paint. The jacket she'd left there, his jacket, had not been on her shoulders this time. She missed its weight more than she expected. She exhaled only when the doors opened into the quiet lobby. The doorman straightened, offered the practiced neutral concern reserved for high-paying tenants who showed up looking anything less than invincible. She nodded, kept moving, stepped into the cool bite of a Pittsburgh night that sparkled against the river like spilled glass. Her driver opened the sedan door. "Home, Ms. Hale." She hesitated, then said, "Office." The city flowed past bridges, old brick warehouses reborn as cafes, a neon sign buzzing over a bowling alley, steel bones and glass skin, all the things she had built, all the things she could control. Yet the sensation in her chest, the small inconvenient ache, refused to be managed by calendar invites or capital calls. Upstairs, 30 floors above the street, her office glowed. The skyline made a mirror of the windows. She set her purse down and reached for the weathered jacket folded on the credenza. Her fingers found the frayed seam at the cuff, the place where the thread had been worried loose by a man who used his hands for a living. Heat rose in her throat. She pressed the jacket to her chest. Her wrist felt bare. The missing emerald bracelet, her father's gift, left a pale circle on her skin. She touched the empty place with a thumb, and memory rushed in oil under her father's nails, the hum of the shop radio, the good clean fatigue of a man who fixed what other people needed to survive. Never forget where you came from, Vicky. And never mistake polish for strength. On the night of her college graduation, he had pressed the bracelet into her palm. Not extravagant, not like the jewels she wore to board dinners now. A slim gold chain, a small emerald chosen by a mechanic who'd saved overtime in a coffee can, who had wanted his daughter to have one thing that sparkled. "Not to remind you that you climbed," he'd said with a crinkled smile, "but to remind you what's worth the climb." The bracelet had been on her wrist when the steel beam fell. Now it was somewhere under a heap of bent metal and broken glass. Another piece of him gone. Victoria set the jacket down with care as if it might bruise. She stood for a long moment, bathed in the blue glow of the city, then pressed the intercom. "Robert." His voice came warm, reliable, a soft footstep down the hallway of her days. "Yes, Ms. Hale. I want human resources to coordinate with site management, safety review interviews every crew, not group sessions one-on-one. I want names times locations, quietly. And Robert, no memos that say, 'Identify the rescuer.' This is about safety. Understood. Understood." A pause. "And the reward?" She glanced at the jacket again. "Make it 25. 25,000? Yes. Discretionary. No press blasts. If it leaks, it leaks." "It'll leak," he said gently, factual. "I know," she said, and ended the call. The empty office hummed. The air plant on her shelf, some designer's idea of balance, looked like a thing trying to float. She almost smiled. Balance. As if that could be purchased in a pale concrete pot. Her phone buzzed. Caroline Weber. "Of course." "Tell me you're home," Caroline said by way of hello. "I'm at the office." A sigh through the line, the kind that sounded like care cloaked in irritation. "You returned to work the day after you were almost crushed by a ton of steel. You do hear how that sounds to a normal person. Define normal." Victoria said a trace of steel in her voice because it was easier than saying, "I couldn't bear to be alone in that penthouse tonight." "How's your evening ruined because I'm on the phone with you?" Caroline said dryly. "Listen, I've reviewed the liability posture with legal. We're safe if we keep our protocols tight. But Vic, this hunt for the rescuer, it's not your usual play." "He saved my life," Victoria said. She paced to the window, the city cool against the glass. "I know. And if you want to fund a scholarship in his name or send a fruit basket to every foreman in Allegheny County, I'm on board. But what if he doesn't want to be found?" Victoria watched a late train cut a silver thread through the dark. "People want recognition." "Some do," Caroline said. "But some people are measuring by a ruler you don't use. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means they're not you." The words pricked not because they were harsh, but because they were fair. She thought of the man's voice inside that smoke steady close to her ear. She thought of his eyes that had looked at her, not like a commodity, not like a problem to be solved, Not like a CEO. Not like a woman. Not like a goddess. Not like a threat. Just like a person. I lost my father's bracelet in the crash, she said suddenly. The confession surprised her. It wasn't in the docket of things she shared even with friends. Caroline's tone softened. Vic, I had it for 20 years. The clasp always snagged my sleeve. I complained. He'd have laughed at me losing it because I was working through lunch. You're not mourning a bracelet, Caroline said gently. You're mourning a man who taught you the shape of integrity. Victoria swallowed. The city blurred. He would have liked the rescuer, she said. He'd have liked that someone helped because it was right. I think that's why I can't stop thinking about it. Not because I owe. Because I want to understand. You can want that, Caroline said. Just don't try to turn understanding into ownership. A small silence. Then Victoria huffed a laugh. Has anyone told you you're insufferably wise, Hourly? Caroline said. Go home, Vic. Soon, Victoria said, and ended the call. She didn't go home. She opened her laptop and wrote, to HR interview plan. To communications. No comment language if the reward leaked. To security access logs for the day of the incident, camera angles, timing, anomalies. To operation safety audit in bold 3 times because fear lived in the repetition. To herself, a single line on a private note. Find him. Not to repay. To know. At dawn, she stood in a car that idled near the chain-link fence of the Grand Tower. The air smelled like wet rebar and burned coffee. Workers streamed in. Hard hats. Lunch pails. Boots scuffed by labor. She watched faces. Hands. The height of men, the way shoulders carried weight, the way heads bent toward instruction with grudging patience or bright attention. She felt ridiculous. A queen peering at her subjects for a prince. She got out of the car anyway. The foreman hat, faded clipboard scarred by the teeth of years stiffened when he saw her. Ms. Hale. Mr. Russo. She shook his hand. It came away dusty. She didn't brush her suit. We weren't expecting... He gestured vaguely at the mess of dawn. I know. She raised her voice to reach the small circle of men who had paused hunched in that loose, wary stance shared by crews the world over. We're instituting a safety review. Not because of blame, because people go home at night, and I intend for them to keep doing that. A few heads dipped, most stayed still. Interviews will be one-on-one. You'll be paid for the time. You will not be penalized for honesty. She let the sentence hang anchored by her gaze. One of the younger men, 22, maybe lifted his chin. Is this about the crash? It's about the next one, she said. He lowered his eyes. She walked the site. Steel ribs rose to the gray. Sparks fell like small comets. The air hummed with dewing. A welder's arc carved blue into dawn. A crane swung through a slow arc, and she felt as she always did that swallow of awe, we made this. People pitched their lives into a plan, and from it lifted a thing that didn't exist before. At the far edge, she paused. A man tightened bolts on a support column, forearms, flexing under rolled sleeves. Her heart ticked faster. She took a step, then stopped. He turned. Gray eyes not dark. A scar on the other cheek. Not him. Her mouth tasted like disappointment. What had she expected? That he would look up and some bell inside her would ring. That she would know the shape of his absence in the shape of his face. By 10, she sat in the back of her car, not trusting herself to drive. She called Robert. Schedule me for a walkthrough at all active sites this week, she said. Small crews, no press, no executives. Yes, Ms. Hale, and Robert. She hesitated. If someone steps forward, if we find him, the offer is not money. Then what? Her eyes went to her hands. The right door, the right room, whatever fits his life. That's unusual, he said carefully. So am I, she said, and ended the call. At lunch, she didn't eat. She walked. Past a daycare where toddlers painted with palms. Past a church with the doors propped open and a fan moving hot air in slow circles. Past a barber where a man in a cape laughed at something said into a mirror. She stopped at the corner and looked up at a building she'd reskinned last year. Sun moved over its face like water. Her smile was small and private. She used to believe the city approved of her. Today, she wondered if it merely tolerated her. In the afternoon, the news leaked. Hail Global offers reward for anonymous hero. Not her wording, not her tone. She read the article on her phone and felt the familiar surge of irritation being quoted by people who never called being summed by headlines that sanded the corners off complexity. Her PR chief texted a suggested statement. She typed back 2 words. No comment. Her screen lit with incoming congratulatory notes from developers she didn't trust, a request for an exclusive from a magazine that always airbrushed her into porcelain and ice, a message from an unknown number that contained nothing but a thumbs-up emoji. She closed the phone and set it face down on the desk like a sleeping animal. That evening, she met Caroline at a small place tucked under a railway overpass. Brick walls, string lights, a bar that smelled like citrus and old wood. They ordered food neither of them would finish. "You look like a woman trying to hold a skyscraper with 2 hands," Caroline said, tipping her head. "Accurate," Victoria said. "How did he seem?" Caroline loaded the question with subtext. "How did you seem?" She considered. Infuriating, calm. He refuses to be bought. He refuses to be flattered. He refuses to let me rewrite what happened into a story I like. She exhaled and let it turn into a small laugh. And somehow, I respect that more than makes sense. Caroline's mouth softened. Of course you do. You've been surrounded by people who want from you for so long that someone who wants nothing feels like a miracle. A miracle with a 6-year-old who makes rockets out of cereal boxes, Victoria said, smiling despite herself. The smile fell. He asked me why I helped him that day. Caroline paused with her glass halfway to her lips. That's a good man. One who pays attention. He meant why now? Why the job? Why the interest? And I didn't have an answer I trusted coming out of my own mouth, Victoria said. I don't want to buy him. I don't want to own gratitude. I want to put something true in the world, and maybe he's part of that. Caroline set the glass down. Then act like truth, not like a ledger. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence you get only with friends who know your ghosts. Outside, the train roared over their heads and turned conversation to vibration. The string lights trembled. Shouts from a baseball game drifted across the blocks, joy, in a language she hadn't spoken much lately. Do you ever think, Victoria said finally, that we build so we won't have to feel... Caroline looked at her long and kind. I think you built because you know how to hold weight. Maybe now you're allowed to put some of it down. She went home with that sentence like a warm stone in her pocket. In the quiet of the penthouse, too large, too curated, too much art arranged for conversations that never happened, she opened the door to her closet and found a shoebox on the top shelf. Inside, paper napkins from diners that no longer existed. A bolt from the first building she had rehabbed stamped with a date. A photo of her father grinning under a hood, teeth white against oil-stained cheeks. She set the photo by the bed. The city lights winked like taillights on the river. She sent one more email before sleep to security pull badge logs for every entrance surrounding the accident, cross-reference with manual head counts, look for gaps of 15 to 30 minutes, and after a long pause she added, to Robert tomorrow morning, I want to stand where that car was and watch the crews arrive. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. Sleep took her with the thunder of metal still in her ears and the rasp of a stranger's voice saying, Stay with me, woven into the dark. At sunrise, a sanitation crew hosed the last glitter of glass into the gutter. She stood on the curb where she'd bled onto the concrete and closed her eyes. Felt the weight of the jacket again, the shudder of release when the door gave the foreign shaming relief of being the one pulled rather than the one in control. A bus rumbled past. Life indifferent and endless carried commuters toward lives that required them. She opened her eyes and straightened. Find him, she said quietly, to the air, to the men setting cones, to the bruised slice of street, to herself. Find him, and when you do, don't ruin what made him heroic. By afternoon, the rumor had made its way through every break room and mudroom and coffee truck within 5 miles of Grand Tower. The number inflated by retelling. 25 became 30. 30 became 50. Men laughed and swore and calculated. Someone said the phrase life-changing money aloud in a voice that trembled with both hope and caution. And somewhere under a steel skeleton, a man with a quiet mouth and steady hands chose once again not to step forward. The day ended the way it had begun, with the city glittering like a promise, and the pulse of something new beating under the concrete. Victoria stood at her office window, the river slick and pewter below, and said to her reflection, the one that had learned to look untouchable, "If you want to do this right, you have to learn a new kind of strength." Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Sat 10 a.m., Riverside Park. "I'll bring coffee. We should talk." Her breath caught, not with fear this time, but with the feeling of a train finally choosing a track. She typed back, "I'll be there. Extra marshmallows for Emma. Send." Outside, the lights of Grand Tower blinked as crews finished their shift, tiny stars affixed to a constellation of girders that would, with enough days like this, become a shape with walls and windows and a view. A place to stand and look out across a world that hurt and healed and kept asking people what kind of humans they wanted to be. Victoria touched the pale circle on her wrist again. The skin there was warmer now. She picked up the jacket one more time before she left and, without quite knowing why, folded it carefully into a garment bag. Some things you carried until you knew where they belonged. Riverside Park smelled of damp earth and cut grass, the kind of smell that reminded Blake Carter of his own childhood summers' barefoot sprints through open fields, his father calling him back for supper. Now it was his daughter's voice that carried across the park. Emma's laughter was bright as she chased a kite that refused to catch the weak morning breeze. Blake sat on the weathered bench, coffee cooling in his hand, his eyes never straying far from her small frame. This park was their sanctuary. No job site clamor, no overdue bills stacked on the counter. Just Emma climbing, tumbling, trying and trying again, and his heart swelling at every silly triumph. He heard footsteps approach before he saw her. Crisp, measured, not the hurried stride of a passerby. He glanced up, and there she was, Victoria Hale. Not in the severe suit he'd always seen in the business pages, but in jeans, a cream blouse, hair pulled back with strands loose around her face. For a moment he didn't breathe. She looked ordinary, yet in a way that made her stand out even more. "Mr. Carter?" she said, her voice softened by the open air. "Ms. Hale," he replied, setting the cup beside him. His voice was cautious, edged with the tension of a man who preferred problems he could fix with his hands, not conversations that tangled the heart. "What are you doing here?" She gestured vaguely toward the path. "I live not far. Sometimes I walk here on weekends." She hesitated, then added, "I thought we might talk." Blake said nothing at first. His eyes drifted back to Emma, who was now hanging upside down from a bar hair swinging like a dark curtain. "She's fearless," Victoria remarked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah. She gets that from her mother. Didn't get much else." It wasn't bitterness in his tone, not exactly. More like a scar he'd learned to live with. Victoria sat at the far end of the bench. The space between them felt measured, deliberate. "It's a beautiful park," she said after a pause. "I don't come often enough." He studied her briefly. She looked almost nervous. "Did you recognize me that day?" he asked. "At the crash?" Her eyes flicked to him, startled. "No, not until later." "Did you—" "I just saw someone trapped," he said flatly. "Didn't matter who you were." She absorbed the words like a stone dropped into water ripples, working their way outward. "Daddy?" Emma came running up, cheeks flushed, breathless. "There's an ice cream truck. Can I please have one?" She stretched the word into song, her small hands clasped together in theatrical begging. Blake checked his watch. "Before lunch, please," she said again, grinning wide. He chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, but small one." He reached for his wallet, then glanced at Victoria. Emma noticed her too. Unlike most children, she wasn't shy. "Are you Daddy's friend?" she asked directly, eyes round with curiosity. "I'm Emma. I'm 6. Victoria's lips curved into a genuine smile. "Hello, Emma. I'm Victoria. I work with your father." Emma's eyes widened. "Do you build buildings too?" "Daddy's the best builder ever. He fixes everything." "He fixed Mrs. Jenkins's sink and he built me a bookshelf for my birthday." Emma Blake muttered, embarrassed. It's true, the girl insisted. Daddy can fix anything, except Mommy, but he says some things stay broken, and that's okay. The words landed heavy in the silence that followed. Victoria's face softened, her eyes glimmering with something she didn't say. Blake looked down, jaw tightening. Go on, sunshine, he murmured. Strawberry popsicle for me if they've got it. Emma nodded enthusiastically and darted off toward the truck. The two adults sat in the silence she left behind. Victoria broke it, her voice low. She's wonderful. She's everything, Blake said, his gaze fixed on Emma. His tone was simple, but there was a depth in it that made Victoria's chest tighten. Emma returned, balancing 3 treats. I got you a strawberry one, Daddy, and I got a vanilla cone for your friend because everyone likes vanilla, right? She thrust it toward Victoria with expectant eyes. Victoria accepted it carefully, the ice cream already melting. Thank you, Emma. That's very thoughtful. The girl beamed. Then she started chattering about school, about her best friend Mia, about how she was going to build a rocket ship out of boxes. Victoria found herself laughing, caught up in the rhythm of Emma's joy. What do you do? Emma asked suddenly, tilting her head. Like for work, Victoria smiled. I run a company that builds buildings. Emma gasped. Like the really tall ones, downtown Daddy helps build those too. He's the best builder. Blake shifted uncomfortably. Emma? It's true, she said again. Daddy says buildings need strong foundations. He says people do too. Victoria's eyes met Blake's. Something unspoken flickered there, recognition maybe. Respect. Go try the swings, sunshine, Blake said gently, brushing a napkin across her sticky cheek. Not too high. Emma skipped away. The air thickened between the adults. Victoria spoke first. I know you don't want recognition, but you should have it. What you did, Blake cut her off. You want to thank me, fine. Then hear me. I don't want money. I don't want headlines. I don't want to be turned into some story that benefits your company. I did what anyone decent should have done. That's all. Her throat tightened. She started to protest, but his steady gaze stopped her. For once, words failed her. Emma called from the swings. Come back next Saturday. Okay? We're bringing a kite if it's windy. Victoria hesitated, looking at Blake. His expression was guarded, but after a beat, he gave the smallest nod. I'd like that, Emma, she called back. As she walked home later, something startling dawned on her. For 2 whole hours, she hadn't thought about stock prices, about board meetings, about Richard. She had thought about kites, about ice cream, about a man who looked at her without calculation, and a little girl who offered ice cream cones like treasures. For the first time in years, the knot of tension between her shoulders had loosened, and she wondered with a mix of fear and longing what that might mean. The boardroom on the 30th floor gleamed with chrome and glass, but Victoria Hale's mind was still back in the park. She sat at the long table posture, flawless suit, immaculate, the skyline stretching out behind her like proof of her empire. Yet her thoughts wandered to a weathered bench, to a 6-year-old with sticky fingers and cardboard dreams, to a man who spoke of foundations as if they meant more than concrete and steel. Ms. Hale. Her assistant Robert cleared his throat gently, sliding a folder in front of her. We've compiled the background check you requested. On the man from Riverside. Victoria's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression cool. She opened the folder slowly. A grainy employee photo stared back. Blake Carter. Age 35. Navy veteran. Former architecture student at Cornell. Dropped out before graduation. No criminal record. No disciplinary marks on site. Single parent. Daughter, Emma Carter, age 6. Victoria studied the lines of his face in that photo. No smile, no frown, just direct eyes. A face that looked older than its years, marked by responsibility. Fatigue, resilience. Her fingers lingered on the page. HR cross-referenced time logs. Robert continued. Carter's badge was inactive from his station during the 22 minutes of your accident. That matches the security footage window. Victoria closed the file. So it's him. Yes, ma'am. Does he know we know? Robert shook his head. Not unless he assumes. He hasn't come forward. Refused the bonus, refused interviews, said nothing. Victoria leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She had found him, yet instead of triumph, unease gnawed at her. Why hide? Why refuse help that could change his life? Her gaze drifted to the skyline beyond the glass, but her reflection stared back at her, polished, untouchable. For the first time, she wondered if that reflection was what Blake saw. A fortress. A woman who turned gratitude into transactions. Across town, Blake rinsed dinner plates in the small sink, the smell of garlic bread still clinging to the air. Emma sprawled on the rug, crayons scattered, humming as she colored. He loved these moments, ordinary quiet. They steadied him. A knock rattled the door. Emma perked up. Maybe Mrs. Jenkins? Maybe, he murmured, drying his hands. He opened the door and froze. Victoria. Her presence filled the narrow hallway. No bodyguards, no polished entourage, just her, dressed simply, yet still looking like someone from another world. Miss Hale, he said, his voice low. What are you doing here? I needed to see you. Her tone was steady, but her eyes flickered with nerves. May I? He stepped aside reluctantly. She stepped in, glancing around the modest space, the thrift store sofa patched in the corner, the bookshelf stuffed with worn paperbacks, Emma's paintings taped along the walls. Emma gasped and jumped to her feet. Victoria. You came. Do you want to see my rocket? Victoria smiled, crouching down. Yes. Show me. Emma raced to the corner and wheeled over her cardboard creation glitter, still clinging to its crooked wings. This is where astronauts sleep. Daddy helped cut it. But I designed it. Victoria ran her fingers across the cardboard edges, her expression softening. It's extraordinary. You'll be an architect one day, Emma. Emma puffed up with pride. Like Daddy Blake's chest tightened. He cleared his throat. All right, sunshine. Bedtime. Emma pouted, but obeyed, hugging Victoria suddenly, before scampering down the hallway. The room quieted. Victoria rose slowly, her voice gentler than he'd ever heard. You studied architecture? Cornell. What happened? Blake crossed his arms, his jaw flexed. Life happened. Bills, a baby, a wife who left. Dreams don't put food on the table. Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable. I came to thank you, she said finally, and to offer you a chance, not charity. A position at Palmer Development, a role that uses your skills. Blake let out a short, humorless laugh. So that's the game. The rich CEO swooping in to rescue the poor construction worker. Balance the scales? Her face tightened. That's not what this is, isn't it? His voice was sharp, though his tone stayed quiet. You tracked me down. You came here. You think lifting me out of my world is generosity. Did you ever stop to think I might not want saving? The words landed heavy. Victoria's lips parted, but no retort came. For the first time in years, she couldn't summon the perfect answer. I should go, she whispered. Blake's chest rose and fell. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, regret already edging his anger. Wait. She paused at the door hand on the knob. I'm sorry. You came to say thank you, and I bit your head off. His voice softened. But tell me something. Why did you help me that day? The question startled her. She blinked. Because you were in danger. No, he pressed gently. Why? Her silence stretched. Because that's what people should do, Blake said. Because my little girl watches me. She learns from every choice I make. If I walked past you that day, what would she learn? That people only help when there's something to gain. Victoria swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had lived in that world for so long where every act had leverage, where kindness was currency. To hear it spoken this way, stripped of all conditions, it shook her. Blake exhaled, voice low. That's the only reason, and that's all I need. For once, she had nothing to argue, nothing to add. She opened the door slowly, her eyes meeting his one last time. I'll see you Saturday. The latch clicked shut behind her. Blake stood in the quiet apartment, Emma's glittering rocket catching the lamplight. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. He hadn't expected gratitude, but he hadn't expected this either. A battle of principles drawn not with contracts, but with truths neither of them could easily ignore. And deep down, though he wouldn't admit it aloud, he knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded too neatly to be junk mail, too official to ignore. Blake found it wedged among flyers on the small table by his door. Past due notices, a coupon for tires, a dentist reminder. The envelope was heavy, embossed with a crest he didn't recognize until he turned it into the light. Hail Global Developments. His chest tightened. He carried the stack to the counter, set the letter on top, and stared at it for a long beat, as if patience might change its contents. Emma hummed at the table, coloring a sea turtle with a purple shell. The radio played low some old Motown that made the kitchen warmer than the bulbs could manage. He slid a butter knife under the flap. A single page. Cream paper. His name at the top in a font that had opinions about itself. Dear Mr. Carter, we invite you to apply for an expedited licensing program sponsored by Hail Global, designed to reestablish credentials lost through administrative delay. No employment obligation, no strings attached. We will cover fees, exam prep, and filing support. Should you choose to pursue work here or elsewhere, we'll be proud to have helped. Respectfully, Victoria Hale. His jaw worked. The words, "no strings attached," pulsed on the page like a heartbeat he didn't trust. Daddy Emma asked without looking up. "What's that mail?" he said. Voice rough. "Is it the good kind?" "Not sure yet." He read it again. No obligation. It was exactly the kind of phrase that had footnotes in small print, the kind that started a drift you didn't notice until the tide had you. But there was another truth under the suspicion, a quieter one. The licensing nightmare born of a bureaucratic hiccup after he left the Navy had shadowed him for years. He could do the work. Everyone knew it. The paper said he couldn't. The paper always won. He folded the letter carefully as if roughness would reveal a trap and slid it back into the envelope. The knock came 5 minutes later. Gloria. She didn't wait for a full invitation, edging inside with the momentum of a woman who didn't like to sit on bad news. "Did you hear?" she asked, glasses tilting as she looked from him to Emma and back. "What's wrong? Hail Global bought this building," she said, words tumbling fast. Riverside. Notices went out this morning. Renovations, upgrades, corporate names on the letterhead. You know what that means, Blake. He had heard this story before. New owners, new paint, new rent. He glanced at the envelope on the counter. It watched him like a witness. "Let me see." She handed him a notice, thin and cheerful, full of promises that sounded like threats if you'd lived long enough. "We're excited to invest. We value community, temporary displacement, enhanced security." He heard the words that weren't there. Displacement becomes permanent. Market rate. You can't afford this neighborhood anymore. Emma colored the turtle's eye with heroic concentration. "Are we moving?" she asked, in the flat, fearless way children walk toward the cliff they can't see. Blake crouched so he was eye level. "No sunshine." "We're not moving." He said it with all the conviction he could wrap around a question mark. Gloria's mouth pinched hard. "They always say it won't change." "Then it does." "I got nowhere to go, Blake." He put a hand on her forearm. "I'll find out what's happening." Her eyes softened. "You always say that. And then you do." After she left, he stood by the sink with the 2 letters in a crooked V, one that held a door, one that threatened to shut it. His phone buzzed. The foreman. Carter Mike Russo said no preamble. "Corporate wants personnel files. Not just yours. Everyone's. They're sniffing for talent." Architecture background was mentioned. Blake went still. "And my licensing issue." "Gotta disclose," Russo said, tone not unkind. "Too many lights shining in for me to pretend I don't know. But listen, Hale, Global ain't usually the charity type. If they want your file, they want you." Blake set his jaw. "Maybe they want to own me, or maybe they want to pay you more than you've seen in 10 years to think for a living." Russo grunted. "Up to you, Carter." The apartment felt tilted when he ended the call. He looked at Emma, who had taped the turtle to the fridge crooked and proud. He looked at the envelope with his name, at the notice with the building's new owner, at the ceiling where a water stain shaped like Ohio had grown a darker edge in the last storm. He felt the old arguments rise like old friends. Pride versus pragmatism. Integrity versus survival. He thought of his father, of the day he told him he was leaving school. "A man does what a man must," his father had said. Then he'd hugged him tight and long and added, "Just don't forget the man you wanted to be." At dusk, he wrote a single line on the back of an envelope and propped it against the fruit bowl, a message to himself more than to anyone else. Don't sell the thing you can't buy back. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number, Saturday, 10 a.m., Riverside. I'll bring coffee, hot chocolate for Emma, extra marshmallows. He stared at the screen. He didn't have to ask who it was. He typed back after a long breath. We'll be there. Saturday came washed clean and cool after a night of rain. The park was studded with puddles that reflected little pieces of sky. Emma wore her rain boots, which meant she wintered every puddle like a polar explorer. Victoria arrived precisely at 10, carrying a cardboard cup tray and a manila folder a woman built of preparation and contingency plans. Her hair was tied, but not severe. A few strands escaped and flirted with her cheekbones. Morning, she said, and it sounded like something she meant, not something she said to open a meeting. Morning, Blake returned. For you, she added, offering a coffee with a lid that read 2, sugar, no nonsense in black marker. She handed Emma a cup with a dome of whipped cream, so exuberant it was architectural. Hot chocolate, extra marshmallows. Emma's eyes went wide. Like so many? The maximum legal limit, Victoria said solemnly. Emma took a blissful sip and giggled when whipped cream touched her nose. You got some on you, Victoria said, dabbing it away with a napkin, like she'd been doing it all her life. They sat. The bench had become theirs by use. The river moved the way time does when you stop asking it what it's doing. You bought Riverside, Blake said, not wasting time. She didn't waste it either. We did. The acquisition was in progress before the accident. Before I knew you lived there, I should have told you sooner. People are scared, he said. Gloria's scared. I know. She set the folder on her lap, hands calm. Riverside's part of an initiative. Mixed income housing. Renovations? Yes. But current residents will have guaranteed units at their current rent. Increases cap to cost of living adjustments. Temporary relocation during construction paid. Return guaranteed. It isn't a press line, she added before he could scoff. It's a model we've designed with the city. It looks good on paper, but paper doesn't have a heartbeat. So I'm here. He listened. Not ready to believe, not ready to disbelieve. What about the landlords on the corners bullying tenants to move, he asked. What about the store with the bodega cat and the landlord who wants a wine bar? We've heard, she said, jaw tightening. We're pushing for zoning protections for leasebacks. We're acquiring key parcels to prevent someone from walling you off with luxury nonsense. Someone like your ex, Blake said, not quite a question. Her eyes flickered. Someone like my ex. Emma had wandered to the playground negotiating a trade-one sticker for 2 minutes on the good swing. Blake watched her until she was safe, then looked back at Victoria. Why me? He asked. Why the letter? The licensing. Because you shouldn't be punished by a system's hiccup, she said. Because you're doing work you're overqualified for without the piece of paper that lets the world admit it. Because she hesitated, and in the small gap honesty arrived because I kept thinking about what you said, about what Emma learns from the choices you make. I realize the choices I make teach people things too. I want to teach the right lessons. He stared at her for a long moment. You think life is a lesson plan. I think life becomes whatever we repeat, she said. If I repeat, leverage extraction control, that becomes my city. If I repeat, care boldness repair, maybe it becomes something else. He huffed something like a laugh. You talk like an architect. She almost said I wanted to be one before I fell in love with budgets, but swallowed it. I talk like someone who builds, she said instead. Silence settled. Not empty, just available. Emma ran back breathless. Daddy, can Victoria help with the kite? The wind is being rude. The wind has a personality, Victoria said. Let's see if we can charm it. She rose, and for the next 10 minutes, the Billionaire CEO sprinted across wet grass, holding a plastic kite with a smile as big as sky. She laughed when the line tugged, when the tail snapped, when Emma shrieked at the lift. Her hair came loose, ribboning her shoulders. Blake watched a version of her the city never saw a woman unarmored, sunlit, alive. The kite caught at last, answering wind with its own insistence. Emma jumped at the end of the string. It's flying! It's flying! It is! Victoria said, cheeks flushed. Because you didn't give up. They returned to the bench, damp and triumphant. The folder still sat between them like a question. What if I say no? Blake asked. To your program. To your company. Then you say no, she said. And I'll still walk Riverside until the last tenant is home again. I'm not offering you a leash, I'm offering you a door. If you don't want it, I'll find another way to thank you that's not a transaction. He considered that. You really hate owing people, don't you? I hate keeping score, she said. I've spent a decade in rooms where gratitude is a weapon. I want to do something without a return on investment spreadsheet glued to it. Then why send the letter, he asked softly. Because sometimes the thing that changes a life fits in a stamped envelope, she said. And because I could. He looked away to the river, to the backs of the buildings, to the narrow slice of sky he'd learned to live under. I don't like feeling like a project. You're not, she said. You're a man with a daughter and a past and a talent. And whether you ever use that talent in a room I control is truly your choice. Most people don't say truly and mean it. I used to be most people, she said, and the confession came out so quiet he almost missed it. He turned his head. Their eyes found a middle distance between them where trust might someday sit down and stay. Emma plopped between them with the solemnity of a referee. Daddy, can Victoria come to my school play next week? I'm a cloud, but a happy cloud. It's important. Victoria looked startled, then softened. She glanced at Blake. It would mean a lot to her, he said, surprising himself with the ease of the words. And it wouldn't hurt me either. I'll be there, she said. The promise clean and simple. Emma squealed. We can make you a ticket. It will be golden. I like gold, Victoria said, and laughed when Emma rolled her eyes. Not money gold, silly. Glitter gold, even better. They sat until the hot chocolate was a memory and the coffee was cold. Practicalities returned like the tide. Words out about a reward, Blake said. Guys on site are buzzing. You've made yourself a story. I already was one, she said with that sideways smile that made Power look tired. This one at least gets people paid. You're not what I thought, he said. What did you think, that you'd show up with lawyers and cameras and a pre-written ending? I showed up with marshmallows, she said. He almost smiled. Yeah, that was the right call. They stood. Emma dashed ahead, stomping a puddle with a splash big enough to baptize the day. Victoria reached for the manila folder, hesitated, then offered it to him. Details on the model for Riverside. The caps, the relocation plan, a phone number that rings a real person instead of a tree. You can share it with Gloria. I will, he said, taking it. Their fingers brushed, static skittered up his wrist, simple and ridiculous and true. And the letter she asked carefully. I'll think about it, he said. No promises, no expectations, she returned. He nodded. She turned to go, then paused. Blake. Yeah. Your father, she said gently. He would have been proud. Not because you saved me, because you're raising her the way you are. He didn't answer. Couldn't. He watched her walk away, the line of her shoulders softer than the first time he'd seen her. The city took her back like it always did, swallowing the important people without apology. Emma slipped her hand into his. Is she our friend? She asked. He looked toward the river, toward the tower skeleton, far off its lights already winking on against the gray. Toward the building they might lose and the letter that might change everything, and the woman who'd just run with a kite like she remembered being 10. I think he said slowly, we're learning how. The days that followed felt strange, like the air just before a storm. Blake went about his shifts at the site, hammering steel brackets, tightening bolts, lifting timber with the crew, but every rhythm carried a second heartbeat beneath it. The envelope still sat on his counter. Victoria's offer pressed inside. The manila folder with Riverside's plans stayed propped on his shelf, waiting for Gloria to come by and ask again what he thought of it. But what haunted him most wasn't the paperwork. It was the memory of her running through the park, with Emma's kite hair loose, laughing like someone who hadn't laughed in years. That image didn't fit the headlines, didn't fit the skyscraper boardrooms, didn't fit the woman who bought his building. It fit Emma's world, though. Daddy. Will Victoria come to my play? Emma asked every night that week, as though she needed to keep reminding him, as though he might forget. She said she would. Blake replied, "Do you think she'll bring marshmallows again?" Maybe, he said, ruffling her hair. "But you don't need marshmallows to be brave." Emma grinned. "But they help." On Thursday morning, the crew foreman called Blake aside. The men were finishing the north support frames, but Mike Russo's face was clouded. "You're on another detail today," Russo said. "What detail?" "Corporate wants you moved off camera tomorrow. Media's coming in. Tour of the Grand Tower for investors. They don't want distractions." "Distractions," Blake repeated. Russo shifted, uncomfortable. "Word is Ms. Hale requested it herself." Blake felt his chest tighten. He pictured her steady and composed talking to cameras while he was shuffled out of sight like an inconvenient truth. "I see," he said, voice flat. Russo gave him a look like he wanted to say more but didn't have permission. "Don't take it personal, Carter. This is optics. You know how it goes." Blake didn't answer. He went back to his work, but the clang of steel against steel rang sharper than usual. That night, after Emma was asleep and Gloria had carried up her casserole dish to reclaim it, Blake sat at the small kitchen table staring at the licensing letter. He thought of his father, of the way he'd said integrity wasn't for sale. He thought of the look in Victoria's eyes when she told him Riverside mattered. He thought of Emma's fearless question at the park, "Is she our friend?" The truth was, he didn't know. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Need to speak with you, not about us. About Riverside. Important." Blake read it twice, 3 times. The words "not about us" stuck out. He hadn't even realized there was an "us" to clarify. He typed back, "I'm listening." 3 dots blinked, then her reply. "Richard is trying to acquire the block around Riverside. My ex, he doesn't know I already own it. It's complicated. Can we talk?" Blake stared at the screen. Richard, the man who had once shared her empire, the man whose name still carried poison in her voice. He thought of Gloria, her fixed income, her photographs of her husband on the wall. He thought of Emma and the way she saw Riverside not as units, but as a neighborhood with names and laughter and muddy boots in the stairwell. He texted back tomorrow. 7 p.m. Mrs. Jenkins's apartment. She makes a good witness. The reply came instantly. "Thank you." Mrs. Jenkins' apartment smelled of lavender and old wood polish. Photographs lined the walls, her husband in a hard hat. Children in graduation gowns, grandchildren at Christmas. Gloria bustled nervously, laying out cups, though her hands trembled slightly. "Are you sure about this, Blake?" she whispered. "People like her don't come down here unless they want something." "I'm not sure about anything," Blake admitted. "But if Richard's moving in on Riverside, we need to know." The knock came sharp and punctual. Victoria stood in the doorway, dressed down compared to the suits he'd seen her in, though her presence still filled the small room. She greeted Gloria with a respectful nod, thanked her for the seat, and set a tablet on the table. "Thank you for allowing me here," she began. "I won't waste your time. Richard has been buying through shell companies. He wants the entire block. If he gets enough property, he can pressure the city to rezone. Once that happens, families like yours won't stand a chance." Gloria sniffed. "And what makes you different?" Victoria didn't flinch. "Because I lived in a place like this once. My father was a mechanic. We counted every dollar. He taught me people matter more than numbers. I lost sight of that for a long time. Riverside is my chance to remember." Blake studied her face. She wasn't reading a pitch. She wasn't rehearsing a line. She was speaking like someone who had decided something in her bones. "What's his endgame?" Blake asked. "A luxury high-rise. Walling off downtown. Driving up values. Squeezing everyone else out. And your plan to stop him. But I need ground information. Who's been approached? What offers were made?" Gloria exchanged a look with Blake, then sighed. "The Hendersons on 3 said someone offered to buy them out. And the bodega owner-landlord's been trying to break his lease." Victoria nodded, typing notes. "That's exactly the pattern." "Thank you." "What's in it for you?" Gloria pressed, eyes narrowing. "Stopping your ex can't be the whole story." Victoria hesitated, then said, "Professionally, it proves mixed income development can work. Personally," she glanced at Blake, "because Riverside matters to him, and to his daughter, and somehow that matters to me." The words settled in the air, startlingly simple. Blake looked at her sharply, but her eyes were steady. They talked an hour longer, sketching the lines of Richard's quiet war. When Victoria finally rose, she looked to Blake. There's something else. The Grand Tower tour. Investors, cameras. I had to move you off site. I noticed, he said. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't because I'm ashamed. It's because the world reads too much into everything I do. If they see you, questions get asked I can't afford right now. Blake's gaze held hers. You don't need to explain. I understand optics. Relief softened her shoulders. Thank you. As she left, Gloria turned to Blake with sharp wisdom in her voice. That woman's fighting battles you don't even see. Just be careful. Rich folks' problems have a way of becoming everybody's problems. Blake watched the door close behind her. His thoughts churned like the river at flood stage. He wasn't sure where this fight would end, but he knew one thing: Riverside wasn't just a building anymore. It was home, and home was worth defending. The next morning, the Grand Tower site was a hive of motion, but beneath the usual clang of tools and hum of generators, an edge of tension ran like a taut wire. Yellow caution tape cordoned off the east foundation pit, where engineers clustered with clipboards and grim faces. Victoria arrived in her town car, heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Cameras were already lined up at the far end of the site, local news crews setting their angles. She adjusted her jacket, smoothing her expression into the polished confidence that Wall Street expected. But when she leaned over the pit, her eyes darkened. "Are you telling me the mix is compromised?" she asked the head engineer, her voice low but sharp. The man nodded, his helmet streaked with dust. "Yes, ma'am. The concrete doesn't match spec. It's been diluted. Not enough to collapse today, but long-term integrity." He shook his head. "It's deliberate. This isn't sloppy work. It's sabotage." Victoria's jaw clenched. Sabotage. The word tasted bitter. Richard's fingerprints were all over this, even if the evidence wasn't yet in hand. "Replace them," she ordered. "Every compromised support immediately. Security detail 24-hour watch. And test every batch of material from this moment forward." Miss Hale Robert murmured beside her the cost. "I don't care about the cost," she cut him off. "I care about safety. Start now." Behind her, flashes popped as reporters captured her profile against the skeleton of the tower. None of them knew the battle she was fighting against Richard, against the shadows he cast against the cracks in her own fortress. Blake wasn't allowed near the pit. Russo had him rerouted to the north scaffolding, drilling plates, hammering bolts where cameras wouldn't wander. But word spread fast among the crew. "They're saying someone tampered with the mix. Sabotage. Rumor is the board's furious." Blake hammered harder, jaw tight. He didn't need to hear rumors to know who was behind it. Richard. And he didn't need a reporter to tell him the consequences. If the sabotage wasn't caught, lives would be at risk. When the shift ended, he picked up Emma from Gloria's. Emma chattered the whole way home about school, about practicing her flower role in the play. But Blake's thoughts kept circling. That night, while Emma dozed on the couch, he stared at the Riverside renderings again. He thought of Gloria's warning. He thought of Victoria's voice when she'd said, "Riverside matters to me." He thought of the look in her eyes at Mrs. Jenkins' table, less CEO, more fighter stripped bare. He didn't want to be dragged into her war, but her war had already come to his doorstep. His phone buzzed. "Need to speak. Not about us. About Riverside. Important." It was her again. This time he didn't wait long to reply. "Where? Tomorrow. Community Center at Riverside. 7 p.m. He stared at the text, then typed, "I'll bring Gloria." The following evening, the community center was crowded with folding chairs and anxious residents. The air smelled of coffee and fear. Old men with ball caps, young mothers bouncing toddlers on their knees. Every face carried the same unspoken question. What happens to us? Blake stood at the back, arms folded. Gloria beside him with her cane. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, is Victoria coming?" "She said she would," Blake murmured. At precisely 7, Victoria entered. Not in her skyscraper suit, but in a gray jacket, sleeves rolled, portfolio under her arm. She walked straight to the front and set the papers down. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I know many of you are afraid of what comes next. So let me be direct. The murmurs died down. Riverside will be renovated. Yes. But every current tenant will keep their unit. Your rent will not increase beyond cost of living adjustments. We will cover relocation costs during construction. And when you return, it will be safer, stronger, and still home. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hope flickered fragile. An old man stood. Why? What's in it for you? Developers don't protect neighborhoods, they strip them. Victoria met his eyes. Because neighborhoods like Riverside are the backbone of this city, and because it's the right thing to do. The words hung in the air, stripped of corporate gloss. Blake felt something shift in the room. Suspicion softened into cautious belief. People leaned forward listening. Questions came fast about pets, about appliances, about leases, and Victoria answered each directly, never dismissing. When Gloria raised her cane, Victoria paused. What if Richard buys up the block around us? Gloria asked, her voice carrying. Won't we still be walled in? Victoria's gaze was unwavering. We've secured purchase options on surrounding properties. He won't succeed. Not here. Blake watched the residents' faces, saw the tide turning. He glanced at Victoria, and for the first time he realized she wasn't just protecting a project. She was protecting people. When the meeting ended, applause erupted, hesitant at first, then rolling like a wave. Emma tugged at her father's hand. Daddy, did you hear? We get to stay. Blake looked down at her shining eyes, then back at Victoria, who was surrounded by residents asking questions, shaking her hand. Yes, sunshine, he said softly. We get to stay. But deep in his chest he knew Richard wasn't finished, and neither was the fight. The applause was still echoing in the community center when the first shout cut through its sharp metallic wrong. Then came the pop of shattering glass. People turned. Chairs scraped tile. Children went silent in that animal way they do when adults freeze. Blake's body moved before his mind did. He stepped in front of Emma, one arm reaching back, palm on her shoulder, easing her behind him. He saw Victoria's head snap toward the sound, saw the quick calculation, the narrowing of her eyes, the way her posture altered by an inch into something that took up more space. They hurried outside. The town car sat under the streetlight like a wounded animal. 2 windows spidered white. Red spray paint slashed across the doors in letters big and ugly. Parasite. Another bottle clinked on the pavement and rolled glinting shards. The group of young men who'd done it were already moving, hoodies up, faces turned. One glanced back, smirked a cheap dare in his eyes, and jogged off into the dark. Robert was on his phone, voice clipped. Police now. Plate of the second car. No, the black one get the cam on 9th. Victoria didn't run. She didn't shout. She stepped toward the mess and took it in. The glass catching the light. The hiss of paint still wet. The neighbors at their windows. The way fear ripples fast, contagious mean. Stay back, Blake murmured to Emma. With me. Emma's small hand tightened around his. Victoria turned to the crowd, to the residents who had braved folding chairs and hard truths to hear her speak. Her voice was steady. No one was hurt, she said. That's what matters. It wasn't what mattered to her. Not entirely. But she knew what people needed to hear first. She crouched, picked up the bottle with 2 fingers, careful not to smudge prints, set it gently on the curb like a fragile thing that might break twice. Blue light washed the street in a few minutes, sirens' uniforms, a detective with a notepad, and the particular tiredness of someone who had seen this scene too many times. Victoria met him halfway. Call forensics, she said, soft but unequivocal. Have them dust the bottles, the handles, the paint cans if they left any. I want a copy of the report. If your department needs additional resources, Hale Global will cover them. And please note, she added, looking up into the officer's face with a levelness that made him straighten, this is not a minor incident in a rough neighborhood. This is targeted intimidation in the middle of a housing transition. I expect it taken seriously. Yes, ma'am, he said, pen already moving. Blake watched her watch the way the CEO reeled back up the cable and clicked into place. Not for a camera. Not for a headline. For a woman with her name on the building who refused to flinch in front of her tenants. Emma peeked around her father's hip at the ruined car. Why did they hurt Victoria's car? She asked, voice small and fierce all at once. She's making our building better. Victoria heard her. She turned, came down to Emma's height knees against the cold concrete eyes kind. Sometimes when people are scared, they hurt the wrong thing, she said. Change can feel like someone stealing your home, even when the plan is to make home safer. Emma frowned. But you told them we could stay. I did, Victoria said. And we will. But it takes time for hearts to catch up to promises. Emma considered this as if it were a math problem with a solvable answer. Then she nodded, serious. Okay, I can be patient. But I don't like that word, she added, pointing at the red paint. Neither do I, Victoria said. The tow truck came. The forensics team dusted. The detective promised follow-ups. The night air smelled like solvent and wet grass and something acrid you couldn't name. Robert brought a replacement car around the block. Doors opened. People moved. The crowd thinned back into apartments, into living rooms, where the story would stretch and bend and thread into other stories that had kept this neighborhood awake for years. Victoria lingered. You shouldn't be alone tonight, Blake said. It came out before he could weigh it. I won't be, she said. Security's doubling shifts, and I'm assigning a night patrol to Riverside until construction starts. She glanced at him. I'm sorry Emma had to see that. Blake shook his head. She's seen worse on TV. This is real. Real is easier to explain. Is it? She asked softly. He almost smiled. Sometimes. She nodded toward the community center. Can we talk tomorrow? Not about this? She gestured at the car, but about the actual work. I want you to see the command space. What space? The old laundry room. She said, a flicker of pride in her voice. It's a mess. It's perfect. He felt the tug he'd been resisting curiosity, that old friend. Design and duct tape. Constraints and a chance to make something human. Tomorrow, he said. Morning, after drop-off. I'll be there, she said, and somehow it wasn't dramatic. It was just true. When Blake turned to go, Emma still tucked at his side, Victoria reached out. Not to grab him, not to stop him. Just to touch his sleeve, a light, grateful press of fingers. Thank you, she said. For what? He asked, genuinely puzzled. For standing still when everything wanted to run, she said. He didn't have an answer, so he gave her a nod that meant more than it looked. The Riverside laundry room had the bones of a war story. Cinder block walls, a humming fluorescent light that turned everyone a little seasick, a floor painted so many times it had gone glossy. But it had a big table at its center, and on that table Victoria had laid out the heart of a plan. Renderings, hand-sketched notes, post-its marching in color-coded lines, a sample board where tile met paint met handrail, a taped-on sign, Resident Advisory Welcome. This is yours too. Blake stood with his palms on the table, head bent, reading the notations. Grab bars at 34-36 inches, lowered peepholes for wheelchair users, common room with outlets spaced along the baseboard for oxygen machines, audible and visual alarms, a rooftop garden for late afternoon sun. You did your homework, he said. I started it, she said. You can help me finish. Is that the pitch? It's the invitation, she countered. He didn't move, didn't take the bait. He sat in the institutional chair and turned one of the renderings upside down, the way people do when they want to see the edges better. You're missing lighting here, he murmured, tapping a corridor. This corner will feel like a dead pocket at night. People will avoid it. At a sconce warm color temp, it changes the whole feeling. Victoria scribbled on the margin without arguing. Okay. And these door widths 32 is code, 36 is kind. Her pen paused. She looked up. 36 it is. He went on. Not with the fever of a salesman, with the quiet, exacting pleasure of a man who knew where a hallway could become a trap or a kindness. He noted the height of mailboxes for arthritic hands. He traced a path where kids would cut across grass and wear a desire line whether the plan wanted it or not. He shifted the benches to face each other so conversations could happen without craning necks. He found $10,000 they didn't need to spend and $1,000 they absolutely did. At some point, the fluorescent hum receded. The room warmed. The line between them blurred, not rich and working class, not rescuer and rescued, not CEO and labor. Just two people building. Your father would like this, he said, finally tapping the rooftop garden's rectangle with a finger. Sunflowers along the edge, tomatoes in the back, a section for herbs and the old guys who swear by basil but secretly love mint. He'd pretend to complain about the railing. Victoria said laughter caught at the back of her throat and then he'd bring me a jar of sauce made with the tomatoes he told me I planted wrong. And he'd be right, Blake said. And he'd be right, she echoed, smiling. They bent over the plans again. Time thinned. Robert poked his head in around noon with coffee and an expression caught between bemused and relieved. I've seen board negotiations that were less intense, he said. Setting cups down. Progress. Concrete, Victoria said, dry as a joke. Lighting, circulation, dignity, Blake added, as if those were standard line items. Robert's eyebrows lifted not at the words, but at the we. He covered it with a cough. Right. Ms. Hale, the press is running that story again. Scrutiny, overextension. They want a quote. No comment, she said, not looking up. Then she did. Actually schedule a small press walk next week. Not Grand Tower. Riverside. Local outlets. No ribbon cutting. The right kind of story, quiet, detailed, true. Robert blinked. Yes, ma'am. He left smiling to himself like a man reminded that there are other kinds of power than the kind that rings. When he was gone, Blake said, scrutiny. Richard's friends, she said flatly. They throw smoke to set off the alarms. I run toward alarms. It's a professional defect. And the sabotage. Under investigation, she said. The line of her mouth tightened. We'll fix what he broke. Not if Blake said when. She looked at him. Really looked. The thing in his eyes wasn't bravado. It was belief offered quietly like a tool placed in someone's hand with the handle facing the right way. Her phone buzzed. Caroline. A string of messages. Board wants risk offsets, insurance timing, audit committee. She didn't flinch, but the air changed a degree. Go? Blake said, reading it in her face. I'm not done here, she said. You are for today, he said. Riverside will be here tomorrow. She hesitated. A woman unaccustomed to leaving before the closing bell. But this wasn't an exit. It was a relay. Can I ask something before I go, she said. You just did. You hate that I sent the licensing letter. Blake exhaled a half laugh. Hate is a big word. You think it's a leash. I think you don't understand what it feels like to be the guy who needs a letter from a person like you to do something he should have been able to do on his own. She nodded slowly. I'm trying to help and not humiliate. The line is thin. It is, he said, and softened it with a look that showed he knew she was actually trying. I'll think about it. No promises, she murmured. No expectations, he returned. She gathered her things. At the door, she paused. There was a break-in at Grand Tower last night, she said. We tightened security. If anything happens at Riverside, call me. Don't call the building. Me. Victoria. Promise, she said, and the word came out more pleading than she intended. I promise, he said. It cost him nothing to say. It cost him everything to mean. After she left, he stayed. He moved a sticky note an inch. He paced the room to see the corner from the height of a woman with a cane. He sat in each chair to feel if the room invited or scolded. He imagined Emma running the hall glitter, trailing her sneakers, and considered where to put the bench where she would tie her laces. He didn't notice time until Emma rushed in with Gloria, breathless. Daddy, she cried. Mrs. Jenkins says I can water the sunflowers when they're real. When they're real, he said, lifting her onto the table edge, you can be chief of sunflower water affairs. She giggled at the title and saluted. Gloria surveyed the space. Well, she said, pressing her cane into the concrete as if testing the foundation personally. If the rich lady's serious, this could be something. She's serious, Blake said. It surprised him how sure he sounded. Gloria peered at the renderings, eyes sharp, mind already measuring cabinet heights against arthritis and good sense. Move that shelf. And tell the rich lady to add a hook by my door. My purse deserves a home too. I'll tell her, Blake said, writing Hook Gloria's wall in the margin like a sacred text. They were laughing when a sound from down the hall made them all go still. Not a crash, not a shout. The soft wrongness of a lock tested, let go tested again. Blake lifted a finger. Wait. The sound stopped. Silence gathered in the cinderblock room like fog. He stepped to the door, eased it open, peered down the hall. Nothing. He closed the door. He wasn't a man who jumped at shadows. But the night before had taught him what fear did when you tried to bury it under reason. He texted Victoria. We're fine. Heard something. Your patrol's a good idea. Her reply came fast. Already posted. 2 on rotation. Sleep tonight. He looked at Emma perched on the table with her legs swinging at Gloria's hand, steady on the cane at the plans that had begun as lines and now felt like obligations. Sleep would come later. For now, he put another note on the margin: emergency pull stations every 50 feet, because some alarms shouldn't require permission. That night, after dishes and teeth and one more chapter of the book Emma loved because the cat in it was both brave and clumsy, Blake stood on the small balcony and watched the city exhale. Far off, Grand Tower's skeleton blinked with working lights. Somewhere in that complex geometry, someone had decided to make things fail, and someone else had decided they wouldn't. On his phone, a new message blinked. Security will circle Riverside all night. If you need anything, text me. He typed back. Thank you. For the marshmallows. And the hooks, and the lights, and the garden, and the other things you don't have a name for yet. 3 dots blinked, stopped, blinked again. Good night, Blake. He pocketed the phone, closed his eyes, felt the thin, cool air on his face. Thought of kites and glass and red words, and how sometimes the most radical sentence a person can speak is the one that says, "We will still be here tomorrow." The next morning came soft and gray, the kind of Pittsburgh morning where the clouds hang low enough to graze the rooftops. Blake brewed coffee while Emma built towers of cereal boxes on the kitchen table. He tried to read the paper, but his eyes kept wandering to the phone to the last message Victoria had sent. "Good night, Blake." 2 words, his name wrapped in hers. He felt it heavier than it should have, heavier than he wanted it to. Emma toppled her tower, scattering cereal across the linoleum. She laughed her joy so full it filled the room. Blake bent to pick up the pieces, listening to her chatter about school projects, about a classmate's hamster, about how she wanted to be both an astronaut and a baker when she grew up. He smiled because kids never had to pick just one dream. Adults did. By 8 o'clock, he had walked her to Mrs. Jenkins, kissed her forehead, and promised he'd be back for dinner. The Riverside laundry room was waiting, and so he suspected was Victoria. When he arrived, she was already there. The fluorescent light had been replaced by temporary lamps casting a warmer glow on the walls. The table was covered with sketches. His notes from yesterday had been typed, refined, and printed in a neat stack. Victoria stood with her blazer draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up, pen in hand. She looked less like a CEO and more like someone who had been waiting for him to finish what they started. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Morning," he answered, shrugging out of his jacket. "You've been here a while." "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I kept thinking about the corridor you mentioned, about the light. I walked through my apartment last night and tried to imagine it without lamps. Every corner felt different." He grunted, but it wasn't dismissal. It was recognition. That's how people live. They remember the dark corners, not the fancy lobbies. Her mouth tugged into a small smile. "Then we'll erase the dark corners." They fell into rhythm, sketching, debating, shifting. Blake showed her how to scale down laundry machines so wheelchairs could navigate. She explained financing models, tax credits that made sense of decisions he thought were impossible. He measured her serious gaze, the way she leaned forward when he spoke, as if his words weighed as much as any boardroom report. It unsettled him, but it also steadied something inside him he hadn't realized was tilting. By late afternoon, Robert appeared again, his face tight. "There's a problem at Grand Tower," he announced, voice low. Victoria's head snapped up. "What kind of problem?" "Structural," he said. "Initial reports suggest diluted concrete in the foundation supports. We've halted work." Blake stiffened. He knew what that meant. He didn't have to be an engineer to see the danger. "That's sabotage," he muttered. "No way that happens by accident." Robert nodded grimly. "We suspect as much. Forensics are on site." Victoria straightened, smoothing her sleeves as if to armor herself. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Blake spoke before he could stop himself. "You shouldn't go alone." Her eyes flickered to him, unreadable. "It's my project, my responsibility." And maybe his trap, Blake countered. "You said Richard wouldn't stop." "You were right. If he's cutting foundation supports, he's not playing games. He's trying to bury you." Silence stretched. Robert cleared his throat. "Miss Hale." "Victoria, he's not wrong." Her gaze lingered on Blake, weighing. Then she nodded once. "Fine. Come with me." The Grand Tower site loomed like a wounded animal in the distance. Tall skeletal encased in scaffolding, its bones lit by harsh construction lights. Police tape cordoned off part of the foundation. Engineers clustered around samples of concrete. Security guards patrolled in tighter circles than usual. The smell of dust and wet cement hung in the air. Victoria strode forward, her heels striking sharp against the pavement, but Blake kept pace beside her. He scanned the site like a soldier, eyes narrowing at every shadow, every idle figure. His years in the Navy came back to him like instincts stored in muscle. The lead engineer met them with a clipboard. The concrete mixture doesn't match the spec, he explained. It's been watered down, still within code, technically, but nowhere near what we paid for. Long-term, the structure would fail. Victoria's jaw clenched. Replace it. All of it. I don't care about the cost. Safety first. 3 to 4 weeks minimum, the engineer warned. Millions added. Do it, she snapped. Then softer. Do it right. Blake walked the perimeter, crouched near the supports, brushed his fingers against the mix. He shook his head. Consistent dilution. Not random. Someone wanted this to pass inspection, but fail later. Victoria's eyes locked on him. Richard. Who else, he asked. A detective approached, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a cufflink gold engraved with initials. RM. The detective raised his eyebrows. Found near the compromise section. Blake's stomach tightened. He knew men like Richard. Arrogant enough to leave a signature, but clever enough to spin it into doubt. Could be planted, he muttered. But it fits. Victoria's mask cracked for half a second. Anger, hurt, fury. Then it sealed again. File it. Add it to the report. Make sure it doesn't disappear. The detective nodded. As the night stretched on, Victoria directed orders with the calm precision of a commander. Blake shadowed her, reading reports, checking materials, speaking to workers with the blunt respect of one who had lived on scaffolds. They worked until dawn bled pale across the horizon. By the time they left, their clothes were dusted and gray, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. In the truck, silence wrapped them. Victoria leaned her head against the seat, eyes closing for a moment longer than a blink. Blake drove his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. He won't stop, she said quietly. No, Blake agreed. But you can make him think he won. She turned her head. What? Let him believe Grand Tower is failing. Let the board look shaky. Let Richard step into the open to claim victory. Then you have him. Her eyes narrowed, studying him in the faint light. A trap. He nodded once. Exactly. Silence stretched again, heavy but alive. Then she spoke softer than he'd ever heard. Why are you helping me, Blake? He kept his eyes on the road. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some people too. Her breath caught, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. When he pulled up to her building, she rested her hand lightly on his sleeve. Just once. Just long enough to mean something. Bring Emma to dinner tomorrow, she said. We could all use something normal. Normal. Such a simple word, such a foreign one. But Blake found himself nodding anyway. Victoria's penthouse was elegant, softened by change. Child's drawings pinned beside art. A throw blanket slouched across a leather chair. Books that had been touched, not staged. Caroline teased her as she fussed over takeout boxes and wine glasses. The great Victoria Hale nervous over dinner with a construction worker and his daughter. He's not just a construction worker, Victoria replied without thinking. Caroline's smile said everything. The doorbell rang. Blake stood there in a button-down Emma with a ribbon in her hair and a gift bag in her hand. We brought dessert, Emma said proudly. Daddy says it's polite. Victoria bent to take it, her heart strangely full. That's very thoughtful. And when Emma tugged her inside, talking about rocks and flowers and things that mattered more than towers of steel, Victoria realized the truth. The foundation shifting under her feet wasn't concrete. It was trust. It was possibility. It was them. The evening light spread gold across Victoria's penthouse windows, bathing the city below in a glow that seemed softer than usual. Perhaps it was only because Emma's laughter filled the space, bouncing off polished glass and stone like sunlight breaking into a cavern long starved of warmth. Takeout boxes crowded the kitchen island, dumplings, noodles, stir-fried vegetables, and paper cartons that steamed in the cool air. Emma perched on a tall stool, swinging her legs, explaining the difference between her special rocks with the gravity of a professor. This one, she said, holding up a smooth gray pebble flecked with white, is a moon rock. It fell from the sky. Daddy says it's from the river, but I know better. Victoria leaned closer, her voice conspiratorial. I believe you. Sometimes the river hides things for only the bravest kids to find. Emma grinned, satisfied, and pushed another rock toward Blake. This one's for you, Daddy. It's strong, like you. Blake's throat tightened. He brushed her hair back gently, his rough fingers trembling just enough for Victoria to notice. Caroline excused herself early, offering a sly smile toward Victoria that made Blake arch an eyebrow. But Victoria only laughed it away, pouring tea into porcelain cups that had rarely been used before. When Emma finally yawned mid-sentence about her flower costume for the school play, Blake lifted her easily and tucked her against his shoulder. She's out, he murmured, amused. Let her rest on the couch, Victoria suggested. She pulled a blanket from the armchair one Blake noticed didn't match the sleek interior. Something soft, hand-woven, almost too personal for her otherwise curated home. She draped it carefully over Emma. For a long moment, the two of them just stood there, watching the little girl's chest rise and fall. She trusts you, Blake said quietly. Kids don't give that easily. Victoria's lips parted, but she couldn't find words. Instead, she moved toward the balcony, needing the cool air, needing space. Blake followed. The city glimmered below them, a living map of light and sound. Victoria's hands gripped the railing nails, digging into her palms. She asked if you'd come to her play, Blake said. His voice was almost casual, but something in it trembled like a bridge under strain. I wouldn't miss it, Victoria replied. The truth in her voice surprised even her. Blake studied her profile, the curve of determination, the weight of fatigue she never let anyone else see. This fight with Richard, it's going to get worse. I know, she admitted, but I can't let him win. Not with Riverside, not with Grand Tower. Too many people depend on it. Too many people depend on you, Blake countered. Her eyes turned toward him sharp, then softened. And who depends on you? He didn't hesitate. He looked through the glass door at the little figure curled on her couch. Emma. Always Emma. A silence stretched between them, filled with the thrum of the city and something deeper unspoken. Victoria broke it first. The board meets tomorrow. They want me to scale back Riverside. Cut funding. Offset the Grand Tower losses. And what will you say? She straightened steel sliding into her spine. I'll tell them Riverside continues as planned. Non-negotiable. Blake gave a short laugh, not mocking, but impressed. You're stubborn. You'd rather I fold, she challenged. No, he said simply. I'd rather you win. Their eyes locked, a current humming in the quiet. Then her phone shattered the moment, buzzing loud against the railing. She snatched it up, reading, and her face went pale. What is it? Blake asked. Security breach, she whispered. Grand Tower. The new foundation materials were tampered with. Blake's stomach sank. Then let's go. You don't have to, I do, he cut in. His voice left no room for argument. Not just because it's your project, because Emma's asleep on your couch. And if you fall, it touches her too. I won't let that happen. Victoria's chest rose and fell, rapid with fear and fury. Then she nodded. I'll call Gloria. She'll stay here with Emma. Minutes later, Blake's truck roared through the night headlights, slicing the fog. Victoria sat beside him, silent, gripping her phone so hard her knuckles whitened. You ever been afraid, she asked, suddenly, her voice thin. Every day, he admitted. Difference is, I don't let Emma see it. She needs to believe I'm unbreakable. Victoria turned her head, her eyes wet but fierce. And what about me? Do I need to believe you're unbreakable too? Blake didn't answer right away. Kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched. Then softly, maybe. Or maybe you just need someone who won't walk away. The words lingered heavy as steel beams as the tower lights appeared ahead, flickering against the midnight sky. The Grand Tower site poured out of the dark like a crime scene. Blue strobes licking steel, harsh halogens, bleaching color from everything they touched. Plastic tape fluttered on its thin poles. Radios crackled. Somewhere a generator coughed into a steady drone and made the night feel mechanical, unkind. Blake killed the truck's engine. The silence inside the cab pressed around them for one suspended second. "You ready?" he asked. "No," Victoria said honestly, hand already on the door. "But here we go." They stepped into a wind that smelled like wet concrete and cut wiring. A security guard jogged up, breath puffing in the cool air, nodding at Blake, then fixing on Victoria with immediate gravity. Ms. Hale cameras on the west fence went down at 12:03, back online at 12:15. "We've got a hole." 12 minutes, Blake muttered. "Too neat to be luck." The guard led them past a pile of rebar bound with wire that had been half cut and left to gleam like a threat. The foundation pit, once a promise, looked like a wound. A detective in a rumpled suit lifted the tape. "Ma'am, we've secured the area. Materials tampered with again. And we found this." He held up another plastic bag. Inside, a small smear of red transfer, like a whisper of paint, clung to the edge of a broken pallet. Next to it, a sliver of metal, almost nothing, curved like a comma. "What is it?" Victoria asked. "Shaved lockpiece," Blake said before the detective could answer. "Filed clean, then snapped to look like age. Whoever did this wanted it to pass a glance." The detective shot him a look. "You law enforcement Navy Seabees," Blake said. "Long time ago." "Useful," the detective replied, tucking the bag away. "We'll process it. There's more." They walked to the west perimeter where a gate hung at a wrong angle. Blake crouched and pointed with 2 fingers, careful not to touch. "See that boot tread? Not work boots. Softer sole. Likely athletic." And here he eyed a tiny glint. Micro scratches on the latch. Someone slid a blade to lift the tongue. Experienced, not a neighborhood kid. Victoria said nothing. She folded the edges of her blazer tighter, a makeshift armor that didn't help. Her mind ticked through contingencies, the board meeting in the morning, the balance sheet that would absorb this hit like a body takes a punch. She pictured investors' faces, arched eyebrows behind designer frames. She pictured Emma sleeping under her blanket, small and untroubled. She forced her breath steady. "Chain of custody," she said to the detective. "No shortcuts. I want every sample logged, every photo time-stamped, every access badge cross-referenced." "Already in motion," he said. "We've got forensics dusting, and we found something else you're not going to like." They returned to the foundation where a cooler of fresh admixture had been cracked open and resealed. Forensics photographed the lid, the fingerprints dusting like frost across plastic. "See the residue line," the tech said, pointing with a gloved hand. Liquid level dropped, then topped with water. "It'll set. It'll pass code. But 20 years from now." "It fails." Blake finished jaw tight. Victoria's voice changed key, dropping lower, each word filmed with ice. "We replace every batch touched, every column poured in this window, every support within suspicion's reach. We do it now." The lead engineer, tired, decent, rubbed his face. "It'll cost us millions." "So would a failure," she said. "So would a funeral." He nodded once. Orders were orders. But he looked at her with that quick, reluctant respect people give leaders when they see the thing beneath the polish is real. They walked. They worked. She stood under the hiss of work lights and made decisions with the clarity that had built her career. Call the supplier at 2 a.m. and demand a randomized lot. Fire the night manager whose logs were conveniently vague. Hire an outside lab for parallel testing so no one could claim conflict later. Post 2 guards per corner. Write a policy with her own hand on a clipboard because sometimes ink from the boss scares lazy compliance more than any memo. Blake moved in a different orbit, checking welds, asking workers where they had been stationed, listening for the story under the story. He found a laborer whose cousin mentioned a new independent crew that had been sniffing for side work after hours. He flagged the names and passed them to the detective. He followed his gut to the breaker panel and found a scored casing that matched the camera blackout. "Deliberate cut," he said. "Easy fix. Easier cover." He and Victoria met again by the pit, both dusted in gray, both ringed by the same blue bruises, fatigue leaves under the eyes. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said, because it felt required to offer, even if he knew the answer. "Neither do you," she returned. They almost smiled, allied by stubbornness. One of the guards jogged over, sheepish, holding up a cheap disposable lighter wrapped in a paper towel. Found this by the fence. Victoria stared. The lighter was red, the kind you bought in batches at gas stations. But on its side, stuck in the grit, a tiny gold fleck caught the light. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "He's leaving breadcrumbs like a cartoon villain." "Or he knows we'll think that," Blake said. Plausible deniability baked in. She exhaled through her nose. Either way, it's going into evidence. They worked until the horizon lightened smearing orange behind the black ribs of the tower. When the sky softened to the color of old paper, the sight felt less haunted, more human. The night had not beaten them. It had merely demanded their stamina. At 5:30, with crews switching and a fresh batch of coffee arriving like a sacrament, Victoria and Blake stepped aside. Dawn chilled their sweat. Their hands shook separate reasons, same tremor. "Ride?" he asked. She nodded. In the truck, he turned the heat up and let the vents thrum. They didn't speak at first. The quiet held. Then Blake said, "We make him come to you." She turned her head. "How you leak just enough for him to smell blood. A story about cash flow strain. A hint the board's fracturing. You cancel one non-essential feature at Grand Tower, publicly say the facade panel upgrade and let the market read it as desperation. Then private pull the license on a shell supplier you've traced to him. Push him financially until stepping in becomes irresistible." Her mind clicked through steps, a lock opening. He moves to buy the debt. He consolidates pressure. He overplays. "And we're ready," Blake said. "You and Caroline Marshall documents admixture, invoices, camera outages, subcontractor connections. You give the DA a clean, tight package. You coordinate with the few board members who aren't cowards and have them stage a concern session. He won't be able to resist trying to strut. When he does, you have him on tape meeting with the middleman he thinks is loyal." He paused. "Because he's not." "You know a middleman?" she asked, half amused despite the hour. "I know how to talk to the guy who delivers coffee to the middleman," he said. "People tell the guy with dust on his boots more than they tell a man in a $3,000 coat." She let out a breath that turned into something like a laugh. "You're dangerous when you're tired." "I'm honest when I'm tired," he said, less polite. Same difference. She watched the city unspool through the windshield bridges, row houses, a bakery yawning awake. For a moment she saw her father walking into the morning with his lunch pail. She felt the little emerald circle against her wrist that wasn't there. "What if it fails?" she asked. "What if I poke the bear and he just bites harder?" "Then we count teeth," Blake said. "And we build again." "That's what you do, isn't it?" "The whole city is you refusing to stop." She swallowed. The words slid somewhere they weren't supposed to be, and yet they belonged. "I can't lose Riverside." "You won't," he said. "You don't know that." "I know you." The sentence trembled between them like a thin wire strung over a deep drop. She didn't touch it, not yet. She placed it carefully on a shelf in her mind and labeled it evidence. Review later. The truck rolled to a stop outside her building. The sun had climbed just enough to paint the stone gold. She put a hand on the door, then turned back. "Emma's play," she said, voice small against all the iron she'd just carried. "It's today, isn't it, for?" he said. "Elementary school gym, folding chairs, terrible lighting, the finest theater in the city." "I'll be there," she said, "no matter what the board throws at me." A promise, he asked. A promise, she said, and in a life full of contracts, it felt like the only one that ever counted. She slid out of the truck. Then she leaned back in fingers curling on the frame. "Thank you," she added, and her eyes made the word bigger than its shape. "For the plan, for staying." "Go sleep for an hour," he said. "Even generals nap." She smirked. Then she left. She didn't sleep. She showered fast, poured coffee stronger than reason, and called Caroline. War, she said, not bothering with hello. "We're doing it my way." "I'm all ears and subpoenas," Caroline replied. "Leak to the right reporter that we're reviewing capital outlays at Grand Tower. I'll cancel the glass upgrade publicly, quietly prep supportive board members. Send the DA everything we have, and I want you to hire a private lab to microtag every future concrete delivery. If anyone tampers, I want it traceable, like glitter." "Glitter," Caroline said, smiling through the phone. "Has Emma gotten to you?" "She has," Victoria said. "And she's turning me into a person who says glitter with a straight face. Also call Robert. Riverside Press Walk next week." Quiet. Real people, not donors. You're juggling chainsaws while riding a unicycle, Caroline observed. You sure you don't want to be a jazz pianist instead? I can't play piano, Victoria said. Then we juggle, Caroline said. I'll draft the leaks. Try not to bleed on your suit at the board meeting. It makes directors faint. Victoria hung up, grabbed her portfolio, and went to face the men who considered themselves her equals. She left a note on the counter in quick, cramped script. 4 p.m. Don't be late. It wasn't for her. It was a promise to a 6-year-old in a flower costume. Blake spent the morning back at Riverside adjusting dimensions and penciling in grace. He watched Gloria test the height of a mock shelf with theatrical solemnity. He let Emma choose the shade of purple that would become her room's paint, thanks to a cheap sample fan he'd borrowed from the hardware store for research. He answered a call from Russo with a one-word grunt that meant alive. He looked at the clock too often. At 3:30, he held Emma's hand as they walked into the gym that smelled like eraser dust and orange slices. Paper daisies taped to a crepe paper curtain, chairs lined like soldiers, parents trying to look casual while brimming with pride. He scanned the doorway. 4 o'clock ticked toward them. At 3:59, a figure slipped inside and stilled in the back row. Breathless hair damp from a sprint suit jacket over one arm, a shadow of battle still clinging to her. Victoria caught his eye and lifted a hand apology and triumph folded into the same small motion. He exhaled some coil he hadn't admitted existed, releasing. The music started. Children shuffled. A teacher whispered cues. And there, in the second row of construction paper blooms, Emma stood in her cloud costume, solemn and radiant. When she saw Victoria, her face lit like the lights thought they were sunsets. Blake looked at Victoria. She wasn't watching the stage like a corporate benefactor collecting civic points. She was watching like a woman who had found a place she wanted to belong. Her shoulders dropped. Her eyes went soft. She laughed when the butterfly tripped. She clapped when the caterpillar became a ribbon-twirling miracle. She leaned forward when Emma lifted her arms and swayed slow and sure, a cloud that knew how to move for others. When the curtain fell and the shouts erupted and all the parents became paparazzi, Emma ran straight to her. "Did you see me?" she asked, breathless. "I saw you be brave," Victoria said, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "And I think the sky took notes." Emma beamed. Then she did the thing children do when they decide they know your heart. She reached out and hugged Victoria hard enough to surprise them both. Victoria held on. Blake met her gaze over Emma's shoulder, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking. Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones you build when no one is looking. Sometimes the plan happens on paper. Sometimes it happens in a gym full of paper flowers. The war would wait an hour. They had something worth winning for. The boardroom looked like a courtroom with better lighting. Polished walnut tables stretching too far, leather chairs creaking under the weight of money and suspicion. The skyline outside gleamed indifferent. Inside, 12 faces stared across polished wood at Victoria Hale as if she were a defendant. She stood at the head of the table, not sitting her portfolio open like a shield. Her heels clicked once, then stilled. "Gentlemen, ladies, let's begin." A man with silver hair and the faint smirk of someone too comfortable leaned forward. Director Stanton, finance hawk, perpetual doubter. "The Grand Tower delays are troubling, Ms. Hale. Shareholders demand explanation. Delays caused by sabotage," she replied evenly. "Not mismanagement. We are investigating with results forthcoming." Another director, sharp-suited, younger, eager to carve his place, pressed. And the finances' rising costs strained liquidity. Victoria let silence stretch, not rushing to fill it. Then calmly, "Liquidity remains strong. Our position stable. But yes, costs increase when integrity demands we rip out compromised materials rather than build on rot. If that offends your quarterly lens, I suggest you find a different company." A ripple of discomfort. Caroline, seated to her right, hid a smile behind her pen. Ms. Hale Stanton said, voice dry as ash. "Are you admitting Grand Tower is over budget?" "Yes," she said simply. "By choice. By necessity. By principle. And when the ribbon cuts, when tenants move in, when no one dies because we looked the other way, we'll all still be here to count profits. For a moment, no one breathed. Then another director, Margaret Chen-Long, skeptical but fair, nodded once. I prefer integrity over lawsuits. Proceed, Ms. Hale. Victoria seized the crack of support. We'll offset costs by shelving the facade, upgrade an aesthetic flourish. Structure matters more than shine. Release that to the press immediately. Caroline leaned into her mic. Already in draft. The murmurs grew. The trap bait was laid. Victoria held her gaze level across the table. You wanted leadership. This is it. You wanted growth. Riverside proves it. You wanted strength. Then stand with me. She ended the meeting without a vote. Sometimes a leader didn't ask. By noon, the headlines spread like wildfire. Grand Tower project faces budget adjustments. Palmer Holdings shelves glass upgrade amid rising costs. Speculation swirled, analysts smirked on morning shows, and the market twitched. In a quiet office uptown, Richard Mills read every line with a predator's smile. He tossed the newspaper aside, swirling whiskey in a glass despite the hour. Overextended, he murmured, bleeding cash, just like I planned. His lieutenant, slick hair, too eager, asked, Do we move now? Not yet, Richard said. She's proud. She'll try to bluff longer. We'll press Riverside again, squeeze the tenants, watch her scramble. Then we take the whole damn block. He raised the glass. To watching her empire burn. Back in Riverside, Blake fixed a loose hinge on Gloria Jenkins' door, the screwdriver turning slow while Gloria fussed over tea. You've been busy, she said, handing him a chipped cup. Running after Billionaire's boardroom's sabotage. Don't forget you're still human, Blake. He smirked. Reminders help. Emma bounded in, clutching her drawing pad. Daddy, look, I drew the garden with sunflowers taller than you. He crouched to admire. Looks about right. We'll need ladders. Gloria chuckled. That woman Victoria, she's making good on her promises. I almost didn't believe it, but she's fighting, harder than I expected. Blake tightened the hinge, then straightened, meeting her eyes. She's fighting for more than buildings, Gloria said knowingly. I figured as much. That evening, Victoria sat in her office, fatigue clawing her temples when Caroline entered without knocking. She set down a folder, eyes bright. We've got him. Victoria straightened. Richard Caroline nodded. One of his shell companies wired funds to a subcontractor that coincides with the timeline of the adulterated concrete. The subcontractor's foreman flipped too much heat. He says he was paid to cut materials. And we've got emails. Clean chain. Victoria's chest tightened. Not fear, not triumph, but the dizzy weight of a battle nearing its climax. Is it enough to charge him? Not yet, Caroline admitted, but enough to corner him, enough to force him into the open. Victoria's phone buzzed. A message flashed. Dinner. Both of you. My place. Bring Emma. It was Blake, short, solid, a rope thrown across her exhaustion. She allowed herself one small smile. Cancel my evening calls. Tonight I need normal. Caroline raised a brow. Normal. That's new vocabulary for you. Learning on the job, Victoria replied. Dinner was takeout chopsticks clumsy in Emma's hands, laughter spilling across Blake's modest kitchen. Victoria found herself laughing too real unguarded, the sound startling even her. When Emma dashed off to retrieve her stuffed rabbit, Blake leaned against the counter, voice low. You set the hook today. Richard's circling. She nodded. Caroline has the proof, but I need him on record. I need him walking straight into his own grave. Blake studied her, then said softly, We'll get him. Together. For a heartbeat, silence hummed between them, thicker than words. Emma returned triumphant, and the moment broke. But Victoria carried it home like a hidden ember glowing in the pocket of her heart. Later that night, alone in her penthouse, she stood by the window overlooking the city. She traced the outline of Grand Tower with her eyes, ribs of steel stabbing upward into the stars. Her reflection ghosted back at her, polished, relentless but shifting. She thought of Blake's calloused hands pulling her from wreckage. She thought of Emma's drawings taped to his walls. She thought of her father's words, decades old, build things that last. She whispered to the glass, to herself, to the city that had shaped and scarred her. This time, we build it right. The Grand Tower loomed against the night, its skeletal frame wrapped in scaffolding and spotlights. Police cruisers idled at the perimeter. Yellow tape flapped in the cold wind. The entire site smelled of dust-wet concrete and the faint burn of machinery still cooling after hours of work. Blake's truck rolled to a stop just beyond the barricades. He climbed out shoulders tight, scanning the scene like a man walking into combat. Victoria stepped down from the passenger side, her heels crunching against gravel. Her usual armor precision poise seemed thinner tonight. Fear edged her eyes, though she hid it well. A detective approached, nodding at her with quick respect. "Ms. Hale, we secured the site, but you'll want to see this." He handed her a small evidence bag. Inside glinted a cuff-link gold heavy engraved with the initials RM. Victoria's fingers trembled as she held it up. The city lights caught the engraving cruel in their clarity. Blake saw the tremor. Richard. Her throat worked. It could be planted. Or Blake said grimly, "He's arrogant enough to leave it behind. His style." The detective cleared his throat. "We'll process it, but it's damning. Too clean, maybe. Almost like he wanted it found." Victoria drew a breath, slow, measured, but Blake could feel the fury radiating off her like heat. "He's daring me," she murmured. "He wants me to know." Blake stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then don't give him what he wants. Don't let him rattle you." She turned, meeting his eyes. In the raw reflection of floodlights, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman carrying boulders alone for far too long. "Easier said than done," she whispered. Blake's voice softened, but there was steel beneath it. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." They walked the site with the foreman and engineers. The sabotage was meticulous. Concrete diluted just enough to pass inspections, but doomed to fail over time. Had construction continued, hundreds of lives would have been at risk. Victoria's jaw clenched tighter with every explanation. Every column replaced. No delays spared. "I don't care about the cost." The foreman hesitated. "That'll hit the budget hard." "Then it hits me, not the structure," she snapped. "Do it." Blake stepped in smoothly. "I'll oversee the replacements. Make sure no corner gets cut." The foreman gave him a sharp nod, relieved. When they left the site hours later, dawn was a pale line on the horizon. Exhaustion clung to them both, but adrenaline kept them upright. Blake drove hands steady on the wheel while Victoria leaned back, eyes closed, the cufflink still in her hand like a weight she couldn't release. "He won't stop," she said finally, voice breaking the silence. "Not until he destroys everything." Blake glanced at her, then back at the road. "Then stop playing defense." Her eyes opened sharp. "What are you suggesting? Make him think he's winning? Make him overreach. He's a predator. Predators get reckless when they smell blood. You want me to bait him?" Exactly. Set the trap. Draw him into the open. Use his arrogance against him." The truck rumbled over a bridge, city lights shimmering below. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared out the window. Finally, she whispered, "It's dangerous." "So is letting him keep control," Blake countered. Her gaze flicked back to him. There was something different in his tone, not just advice, but partnership. A promise. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, quieter than she meant to. He didn't flinch. "Because Emma's asleep on your couch tonight. Because Gloria's life was turned upside down. Because if you lose this, the people who trusted you lose too." And he hesitated, then finished simply. "Because some fights matter more than survival." She stared at him, words failing until the truck pulled up outside her building. The city was waking around them. Horns, footsteps, the smell of bread from a bakery nearby. Ordinary life. Normalcy. Victoria stepped out, then turned back. "Bring Emma to dinner tomorrow, both of you. We all need something normal." Blake's expression softened, the lines around his mouth easing. "Normal," he echoed. "Sounds good." She nodded once, clutching the cufflink, and disappeared into her building. That night, as Blake tucked Emma into bed, she blinked sleepily up at him. "Daddy, did you save the tall building today?" He brushed her hair back, smiling faintly. "Not yet, sunshine, but we will. And Miss Victoria. Did she fight the bad man?" Blake kissed her forehead. "She's fighting, and she's not alone anymore." Emma nodded, already drifting to sleep. "Good. Nobody should fight alone." Blake sat there in the quiet, her words echoing simple as a child's truth, yet heavier than any boardroom declaration. Down in the city in glass towers and shadowed alleys, Richard Mills tightened his net, believing he was circling a weakened prey. But what he didn't see not yet was the trap being built beneath his feet. The rumor machine started like a whisper. It became wind. By Monday morning, an analyst blog hinted that Hale Global's board had split into two camps. By lunch, a finance podcaster with a smug laugh reported credible chatter that Grand Tower's lenders wanted assurances. By evening, a thinly sourced column declared Victoria Hale's shine is dulling. Caroline sent links across a private thread. Robert replied with timestamps mapping the spread like a brush fire. Victoria read every line and felt strangely calm. They were feeding exactly what Richard wanted to taste. Turn the burner one notch higher, she told Caroline over speakerphone, pacing the length of her office. Float the facade cancellation again. Make sure it reads like triage. Already pushed, Caroline said. Also, our DA contact is ready whenever the middleman is. Victoria stopped. The middleman. Blake, she said almost to herself, and hit call before the thought had finished forming. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah. Coffee and 10, he said. Command room. The Riverside laundry room felt different now, less like a bunker, more like a brain. The temporary lamps glowed warm against cinder block. The table was a city in miniature buildings of paper streets, of tape parks, of green sticky notes. A small jar labeled Gloria's Hook stood at the corner waiting to be mounted in a place of honor just as soon as the drywall existed. Blake stood with his hands in his pockets, a habit he had when he thought hard and needed to stop them from grabbing a wrench that wasn't there. Victoria slid a paper cup toward him, and the warmth soaked into his palms. We've got the DA, she said. We've got a theory, a path, a narrative. We're missing a bridge. Middleman, he said. Exactly. We need him to take Richard's hand. Blake nodded, once his eyes going distant. He pictured names he'd heard whispered at the site, the guys who traded gossip for cigarettes, the ones who didn't ask where a favor came from if it showed up on time. He thought of a man who made 300 deliveries a day and knew every doorman's mood by the weight of their signature. Give me until nightfall, he said. You already have it, she replied. He started to go, then paused at the door. When this is over, he said, we plant those sunflowers. First thing. Her smile was quick and real. First thing. Everyone underestimated the guy with the coffee cart. His name was Dario. He pushed a steel rectangle on squeaky wheels through lobbies that smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive shoes. He knew which guard snuck cigarettes on the loading dock. He knew which assistant always tipped heavy. He knew which men wore watches like promises they didn't intend to keep. He knew which executive liked to talk big when he thought a guy refilling milk wasn't listening. Blake met him where the city's downtown folded into a back alley lined with loading doors and steam pipes. He didn't flash a badge. He didn't pretend. He just ordered 2 coffees and told the truth. You pour fuel for a lot of stories, Blake said. I'm not here to burn you. I'm here to keep a building from falling on people. Dario squinted. You a cop, construction, Blake said. And a dad. Both jobs make you learn how people break things. Dario considered. Blake let the silence do the work. Truth had a way of showing up if you gave it space. Guy named Lennox, Dario said finally, voice low. Talks too loud on a phone with a cracked screen. Always smells like cologne and debt. He plays go-between. Likes steak, likes being seen. You don't look at him twice because that's how he likes it. Who's he love? Blake asked. Money, Dario said. Second choice. The sound of his own voice. Blake paid for the coffees and slid a folded bill under the tip jar like a promise to use the information carefully. Thanks. Dario shrugged, spun his cart. Hey, he called over his shoulder. Sometimes the good guys gotta move like the bad guys to beat 'em. Just don't forget which one you are, yeah. Blake nodded. Not my plan. The steakhouse was the kind with ice ceilings and napkins that felt like shirts. The booths were high enough to hide a sentence, and the waiters moved like choreography. Blake didn't sit. He stood at the bar and watched. Lennox arrived 10 minutes late as if he wanted the room to notice. Slick hair, too skinny tie, shoes that clicked like a metronome. He ordered like he didn't intend to pay. When the hostess led him to a corner booth, he lifted his chin a fraction, a man who'd learned to mimic power in case it mistook him for a cousin. Blake waited until the first bourbon had done its work, then walked over and slid into the opposite side of the booth without asking. "Do I know you?" Lennox said, hearing his own voice like he admired it. "No," Blake said. "But you know a man whose initials are on a cufflink in a bag at a crime lab right now?" Lennox's smile froze at the edges, then melted into annoyance. "You a cop Navy once," Blake said. "Construction now. And I'm tired of what Lennox asked bored, of men who cut corners and call it clever." Lennox lifted his glass. "World runs on clever. World falls on people. When clever gets sloppy," Blake replied. Lennox leaned back, curiosity finally peeking past contempt. "So what do you want, Boots?" "A simple thing," Blake said. "Meet your benefactor, face to face. He likes to pull strings from rooms he doesn't pay rent on. I'd like him to walk into one with tax-funded cameras and coffee that tastes like regret." Lennox barked a laugh. "You're funny." "I'm not," Blake said. "What's in it for me?" "Not being the one who goes to prison first," Blake said. Silence settled. Lennox twirled his glass. The light caught the crack in the screen of his phone as he reached for it, glanced at a text he didn't answer, then looked back at Blake with a predator's calculation. "And if I say no, then the DA's office gets the tender documents with your signature. And your nephew who works nights at the yard without knowing you use his name on things stops getting to go home easy." Blake's voice didn't go hard. It went steady. "You're not the main show here, Lennox. Don't let the third act be your mugshot." For a second, Lennox looked like a boy who'd cheated at a game and realized the teacher saw him do it. Then he smiled, oily and deciduous. "You don't play like construction." "I play like someone with a daughter," Blake said. Lennox sipped, considered, then nodded once like he'd made a decision he'd sell as brilliance later. "Fine. He likes the Wexford, back room. 2 nights from now. He thinks the manager owes him a favor." "Good," Blake said. "He won't notice the favor got reassigned." The pieces moved. Caroline looped in the DA. Wires were prepped. The back room at the Wexford, a private dining space with an obsequious chandelier, was reserved under a fake foundation name that sounded too proud of itself. The staff was briefed, the cameras placed, the angles checked. A carton of bottled water was swapped with one from a lab where each cap held a microdot tag in case hands grew interesting. Robert rehearsed the timeline with the detectives. "We don't arrest tonight," he kept saying, gentle but firm. "We record. We document. We follow money. We end it slow and legal." Victoria watched all of it with the stillness of a person holding a breath underwater. She signed, she approved, she delegated. Then she stepped into the hallway and braced her palms against cool glass and let her forehead rest there for exactly 3 seconds. When she returned, the stillness had turned into a clean, sharp line. "Blake," she said. Finding him in the command room again, bent over the plan as if the pencil in his hand could shape more than drywall. "We need a ghost at the Wexford, someone who can sit where no one sees and hear what we need, someone who knows what to listen for." He looked up. "You're asking me to babysit a microphone. I'm asking you to guard the door with your ears," she said. "And if the door breaks with your body." "Understood," he said. She didn't thank him. He didn't need her to. The understanding was the thanks. Between errands and wires and timelines, life refused to stop being itself. Emma practiced her spelling in Gloria's living room, her pencil squeaking softly while Jeopardy hummed on the TV like a distant debate. "Does sunflower have 1 F or 2? She asked, head tilted. 2, Blake said, pouring water into Gloria's teapot. "Because sunflowers don't do anything halfway." Like Miss Victoria, Emma said, pleased with her own logic. Gloria cackled. "Out of the mouths of babes." Victoria texted between meetings. "Tell Chief of Sunflower Water Affairs that her badge is at the command room. Glitter included." A minute later, a photo arrived. Emma grinning, a paper badge taped to her shirt crookedly. Glitter cop, written in marker. Blake stared at it longer than a photo demanded. Then he saved it. The Wexford sat where old money met new ambition. Dark wood, heavy curtains, the kind of lighting that made everyone look both richer and more tired. The back room smelled faintly of leather and the kind of wine that turned conversations into secrets. Caroline stood by the service entrance with a headset and a half smile. I always wanted to direct a play, she told the detective, who didn't look like a man who enjoyed theater and yet nodded like someone who understood blocking when a case depended on it. Robert checked a list like he'd been born with clipboards in his hands. Victoria walked the perimeter, once eyes tracking the air like a hawk reading thermals. Blake slipped into the small AV room, adjacent to the private dining area, more closet than room, and took the stool near the monitor bank. The cameras showed angles, the head of the table, the door, the hands, the pour. He adjusted the volume. Nothing to do now but wait. Waiting had a flavor. It tasted like pennies and coffee and the clean cold of a hallway before a verdict. Blake knew it well. He watched the monitors and thought of Emma sleeping above Riverside's humming radiators. He thought of Victoria's father, though he'd never met the man because he had the sense that somewhere some version of that man was watching this too. Arms crossed, saying, "Do it right, kid." At 8:11, Lennox arrived. Alone, nervous in the shoulders. He checked his phone 3 times in 1 minute and wiped his forehead with a napkin, like sweat embarrassed him. At 8:19, the door opened. Richard Mills walked in like the room belonged to him because he'd already sold it that morning in a deal only he knew about. He wore power like it was tailored to his body. He shook Lennox's hand mildly as if to remind him who did the genuine shaking around here. Richard, Lennox said, voice pitching higher than usual. "Mr. Lennox?" Richard replied as if manners were a weapon. He sat. He didn't look at the water. "Appreciate you meeting," Lennox began. "Time is money," Richard said, "and she's wasting both." From the AV closet, Blake felt his jaw click. He didn't speak. He listened. Lennox played his part, carefully rehearsed the lender chatter. The board concerns the facade downgrade, presented as capitulation, not strategy. Richard listened with a predator's stillness, the corners of his mouth ticking like a clock that liked the time it kept. "And Riverside?" he asked. "She's still pouring money into that charity case." "She's doubling down," Lennox said. "Community meetings, neighborhood council. She thinks it buys her time. It buys her applause." Richard sneered. "Applause doesn't cover debt service." Blake's fingers curled around the stool's edge. Richard leaned in. "Here's what we'll do. You keep pressure on supply quietly. Another pinch at Grand Tower. Something that won't show up until the ribbon's cut. Meanwhile, I'll acquire her exposure on the bond from the back door. When the board panics, I'm the only lifeline. They'll sell me the tower piece by piece." "And Riverside?" Lennox asked. Richard's smile sharpened. "Riverside becomes a story about unintended consequences." Blake saw something, then he hadn't expected a flicker in Lennox's eyes. Not decency, not conscience, just fear, realizing the game had grown sharper than he'd signed up for. And Ms. Hale, Lennox asked, too neutral. Richard settled back, that awful smoothness sliding into place. "She'll learn what I learned. You can't build a city on principle. You can only sell it." "Not tonight, you can't." Blake murmured to no one and slid the volume up a hair. Caroline's whisper came over his earpiece. "We have him on intent. Keep him talking." Blake didn't control that part. The room did. And the room obliged. Richard loosened his tie like a man preparing to be iconic. He talked about favors owed inspectors he'd bought for sport and story, the thrill of cutting deals in the dark, the pleasure of watching a woman who had beaten him once teeter at an edge he had greased himself. It was all there, not a signed confession. Something better, a portrait painted by a man who didn't know the canvas had a wire behind it. Caroline's voice came again. "We're good. We're very good." The door to the back room opened a crack. Victoria slipped in beside Blake, silent as a blade drawn slow. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes on the monitor were made of a material Blake hadn't seen on Earth before. When Richard said Emma's name, he didn't, not really. He said the kid with a dismissive flick of his hand, the way people minimizing themselves do when they minimize others. Victoria's hand tightened on the edge of the console. Blake reached out without thinking and put his palm over hers. For pressure. For reminder. For promise. She didn't pull away. The scene wound down with the usual exchange of lies that pass as pleasantries. Richard rose first because he was the kind of man who needed to leave a room before anyone else could. The door closed. Caroline breathed. "We have it," Robert said. "We moved to phase 2 in the morning." Blake exhaled slow. Victoria didn't. She stared at the blank screen after the feed cut as if will alone could call it back and make it more damning. "Tomorrow we don't blink," she said. "No," Blake agreed. "We don't." She turned to him close in the half-light, and for a second the city, the tower, the DA, the board, all of it fell away. There was only the knowledge that something had shifted past any point of return. "Go home," she said. "Get Emma to bed. I'll meet you at Riverside by 9. We checked the final punch list for Phase 1. "You're still doing the press walk?" he asked, astonished and a little proud. "Especially the press walk," she said, and the steel in her voice had become something finer tempered, not brittle. "He doesn't get to chase me off the sidewalk." Dawn lifted the city by the edges. Riverside's courtyard smelled like damp soil and new paint. Residents gathered in clusters, curious, wary, better dressed than usual because someone had said press and pride had answered. Victoria arrived exactly at 9, not flanked by handlers, but accompanied by Robert carrying a stack of one-pagers and a $10 folding stool just in case Mrs. O'Leary wanted to sit. Blake met her at the gate. He handed her a hard hat. She didn't take it. "Today," she said, "we show them home." They walked the halls. She greeted names she'd memorized. She stopped beside the new elevator and asked Mr. Daniels how his knee felt on the ride. She opened a cabinet door and smiled at the hook mounted at exactly Gloria's height. She pointed to the rooftop and said to Emma, who had materialized like sunshine, "You're on watering duty after school. Chief duty?" Emma corrected gravely. "Chief duty?" Victoria agreed. Cameras flashed, but they didn't own the moment. The neighbors did. Blake stood back for a second and watched it land the way the project turned from renderings into rooms, the way suspicion thawed into that cautious, defiant hope neighborhoods grow in secret. He watched Victoria move through it not like an owner, not like a savior, like a woman who finally remembered the feeling of building something that built her back. Caroline's text buzzed. "Everything's in motion, noon." Victoria tucked the phone away. Later she whispered to the friend in her pocket, "Allowed to the courtyard cake in the community room this afternoon. Chocolate, don't argue." People laughed. It sounded like relief being brave. Blake moved to her side, low voice meant only for her. "When this breaks," he said, "it's going to be loud." "Let it," she said. "Some things deserve a crowd." He nodded. Across the street a car idled longer than a car needed to idle. Blake noticed. He always noticed. He clocked the tinted windows, the too clean bumper, the driver's posture. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Because noon was coming. Because the trap's jaw was about to close. Because sometimes, after a lifetime of doing the right thing quietly, you get to end the fight in daylight. The city was never truly quiet. Even at dawn, even at noon, there was always the thrum of buses, the far-off honk of horns, the shuffle of feet against sidewalks that had carried stories longer than most buildings had stood. But inside Riverside that morning, there was a different kind of hum, not noise, energy, anticipation. Children darted through the courtyard in shoes that squeaked against fresh pavement. Seniors leaned on polished railings, whispering to one another about how the place looked like new, but still felt like home. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint sweetness of cake cooling in the community room. And then, at precisely 11:55, the hum thickened into a hush. Because Richard Mills had arrived. He didn't belong here, not in this courtyard, not among people who carried groceries upstairs themselves and compared coupons at corner stores. His suit gleamed too sharp, his cologne clung too heavy, his smirk cut through the gathering like smoke. Two men flanked him, silent, broad sunglasses in the shade. Richard moved as if the whole world were a boardroom he'd already bought and everyone else were unpaid extras in his grand performance. Victoria saw him first. Her back stiffened, but she did not retreat. She stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by tenants, reporters, Blake, Emma, Gloria, Robert. She didn't move to greet him. She made him walk the distance. Richard's shoes clicked against the pavement until the sound itself felt disrespectful. He stopped just far enough away to show that he was there to confront, not to join. "Well," he said, voice carrying, "this is charming. Cake and balloons for the sinking ship." Murmurs rippled through the residence. Some frowned, some looked confused, others angry. Gloria muttered under her breath, "Lord, give me strength not to swing this cane." Victoria's expression did not shift. Her tone when she answered was calm. "This is Riverside. A community rebuilt. A project that stands. And unlike you, Richard, it doesn't lean on lies. The reporters stirred like birds sensing a storm. Cameras tilted. Phones rose. The air thickened with that strange electricity when something private tilts into spectacle. Richard smirked wider, feeding on the eyes the attention. Funny, he said. Last I heard your grand tower was cracking, investors whispering, deadlines slipping. And yet here you are, playing house with construction workers and pensioners. How quaint. His gaze slid deliberately toward Blake, standing tall at Victoria's side. Then to Emma, who clutched his hand and peered up at the stranger with open distrust. And who's this? Richard said with mock amusement. Your mascot. Blake didn't move. His jaw tightened, but his eyes never left Richard's. Emma whispered, Daddy, is he the bad man? Her voice was small, but it carried. Silence fell across the courtyard. Richard chuckled too loud, too brittle, out of the mouths of babes. Victoria took a step forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare! Richard spread his hands, mock innocence dripping from every gesture. What I'm only here to remind everyone that Palmer Holdings, excuse me, Hale Global is circling the drain, and when it collapses, you'll all be left holding empty promises. The crowd bristled. A woman near the steps called out, My rent hasn't gone up a dime. My heat actually works for once, another shouted. She kept her word. Richard waved them off as if swatting flies. And then Caroline moved. She stepped forward from the edge of the courtyard, her heels clicking steady, a folder in her arms. Calm, collected, deadly precise. Richard Mills, she said clearly, her lawyer's cadence slicing through the tension. On behalf of the district attorney's office and the state of Pennsylvania, you are hereby served. The silence broke like glass. Gasps, murmurs, shuffling feet. One of Richard's bodyguards stepped forward, but Robert intercepted with surprising force for his age, planting himself firmly between them. I wouldn't, he said, tone flat, eyes cold. Richard's smirk cracked. What is this? Caroline handed him the folder, her voice unwavering. Documentation of material substitution at Grand Tower. Evidence of sabotage traced directly to companies under your control. Property harassment linked to shell corporations you own. Witness statements. And she glanced toward the cameras, making sure every lens caught it, recorded conversations from your meeting at the Wexford 2 nights ago. The reporters erupted. Questions flew like arrows. Cameras zoomed in. Richard's face drained, then flushed, then twisted. He tried to laugh, but it came out jagged. You set me up. Victoria's voice was quiet, but it carried like a verdict. No, Richard. You set yourself up. We just made sure the truth had an audience. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Richard's bravado faltered. The sunglasses men shifted uneasily, realizing this wasn't the sort of fight they were paid to win. Residents stood straighter defiance, sparking in eyes that had too often looked down. Emma tugged Blake's sleeve and whispered, Did we win? Blake crouched slightly, his hand warm on her shoulder. Almost sunshine. Almost. Richard's fury burst at last. He hurled the folder to the ground, paper scattering like broken feathers. He jabbed a finger toward Victoria. You think this is over? You think a stack of papers and a crowd of tenants will ruin me? I built this city. I made its rules. Victoria stepped closer, nose to nose, unflinching. No, Richard. You exploited it, and now those rules will break you. The detectives emerged from the edges of the crowd, badges raised. Not to arrest, not yet, but to escort to remind him that every step he took from here was documented, scrutinized, trapped. Mr. Mills once said, calm but firm, we'll need you to come with us. The courtyard buzzed half with awe, half with relief. Richard looked around and saw something he had never seen before. Not fear, not respect, not envy. Irrelevance. And it hollowed him. As he was led away, the tension bled from the courtyard like air from a balloon. A cheer broke, small at first, then swelling. Children clapped. Seniors laughed, reporters shouted into microphones trying to capture the moment. Gloria raised her cane like a banner. That's for you, Frank, she whispered, and tears shimmered in her eyes. Victoria turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying steady, firm, but tinged with something new. This was never about me. Or him. This was about Riverside. About proving that when people stand together, no one, no matter how powerful, gets to tear that down. Applause rippled like thunder. Blake stepped beside her, Emma on his hip, now, clapping along with the crowd. He leaned just close enough for her to hear. You didn't just win a case. You gave them something they can believe in again. Her eyes softened, turning toward him. Not me. Us. For the first time in years, Victoria Hale smiled in public, not the polished, practiced curve of a CEO. But the raw, unguarded smile of a woman who had fought fallen stood again, and discovered she wasn't alone anymore. The cameras caught it. But for Blake and Emma, it was theirs, the beginning of something new. Twilight poured soft gold over Riverside, spilling across the newly planted garden beds, catching on the bright balloons tied to railings, and turning the rows of windows into mirrors of light. The air smelled of fresh soil baked bread, and something else, hope. The ceremony wound down slowly, neighbors reluctant to leave children clinging to the playground swings, as if they could hold on to this moment forever. Reporters packed up, council members shook hands, and the hum of everyday life crept back into the courtyard. But in the center of it all, Victoria, Blake, and Emma lingered. Gloria approached first, Kane, tapping face creased with both exhaustion and joy. Well, she said, voice husky. He didn't last long, did he? That man strutted in like a peacock and left like a plucked chicken. Blake chuckled, but Victoria's laugh was quieter, almost disbelieving. Thank you, Gloria, for trusting me, for standing with me. Gloria's eyes softened. I trust what I see, and what I see is a woman who fought for us, and a man who fought beside her. Her gaze flicked between them knowingly. Don't waste time dancing around it. Life's too short. Blake looked down sheepish, but Victoria didn't glance away. Not this time. Later, when the last of the cake had been eaten and the courtyard lights blinked on, Emma tugged Victoria's hand. Come see the garden with me, she said. The three of them walked together toward the neat rows of soil. Tiny green shoots broke the surface, fragile but determined. Emma pointed to a bare patch. That's where our sunflowers will go. Really tall ones, taller than Daddy. Miss Victoria, will you help me plant them? Victoria knelt, her hand brushing the cool earth. Of course, sweetheart. We'll plant them together. Emma grinned, satisfied, before running off to chase the last children heading home. That left silence. Not awkward this time. Full. Heavy. Honest. Blake spoke first. You changed this place, Victoria. You gave people more than buildings. You gave them a reason to believe again. Her eyes lingered on the seedlings. I only remembered what my father taught me. That success without principles is just greed dressed in glass and steel. And maybe I forgot that for a while. Maybe it took you and Emma to remind me. She stood meeting his gaze unguarded. I don't want to forget again. Blake stepped closer. The distance between them was gone now, like walls carefully dismantled brick by brick. Then don't. Not alone. We can build something better. One day at a time. Her hand found his, tentative at first, then steady. Across the courtyard, Gloria watched, smiling faintly. Well, Frank, she murmured to the memory of her husband. Looks like love might just move back into this building after all. The wind lifted, carrying children's laughter, the faint strum of a guitar. Someone played on a balcony, the rustle of leaves. It was the sound of a neighborhood alive, safe, renewed. Victoria squeezed Blake's hand. Not just towers, not just profit, a future, together. Blake nodded, his eyes soft, steady. Together. Emma's voice called from across the courtyard. Daddy. Miss Victoria. Hurry! We're cutting the last piece of cake. They turned, still holding hands, still smiling. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield or a burden. It felt like a foundation, one strong enough to hold not only buildings, but lives rebuilt from the ground up. Some rescues, it seemed, worked in both directions. And some foundations once laid with care could support something far more enduring than towers of steel and glass. They could support family. They could support love. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful, healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.